Good evening, everyone. I call the June 12th, 2023 school board meeting to order. It is 6:07 p.m. We're in conference room C of the Fisher Administration Building at 12121 West North Avenue. Ms. Summers, please call the roll.
Dr. Worley.
Here.
Mr. Morris.
Here.
Mr. Meyer.
Here.
Dr. Jessup Banger.
Here.
Dr. Hoyt. Here. Ms. Highmore Walland. Here. Ms. Willis. Here.
Thank you all. We are starting a little bit late because our Legislative Advocacy Committee went right up to 6 p.m. A lot happening in the state of Wisconsin right now around legislative advocacy from funding. So thank you to the members of our committee working on that item. I know more will be coming back to the board. And probably no report from the superintendent this evening. We start out with public comment on non-agenda items. Members of the Wauwatosa School Board value the input of students, parents, staff members, and community members. The board's regularly scheduled meetings provide an opportunity for opinions and concerns to be raised and expressed publicly. The board values all comments and will respectfully consider this input in decision-making. The board requests that individuals limit their comment on each item to 3 minutes. Following any comment, an individual board member may respond on the issue raised. However, it is not the intent of the public comment portion of the agenda for the board to enter into a debate with a member or members of the community. Because non-agenda items are not publicly posted in advance, no action will be taken on public comment regarding non-agenda items this evening. We'll start with public comment in the room if there is any, and would be happy to entertain that now. If you can come on up and share your name and address.
Good evening. My name is Chris Bauer. I live at 3159 North Knoll Terrace. I'm here in my capacity as a concerned parent, but also as the president of the Eisenhower PTA. First, I understand that this is going to be off topic for the night, but I don't have a way to put my message out there and on the record for those that need to hear. I know that you won't be able to respond directly to me as it is not your place in this forum. That's why I've emailed this to each of the board members and to Superintendent Means, along with the supporting documents that I will refer to. If you would like to continue this conversation, please let me know when and where you're available. Board President Jessup Banger, this is the importance of the public comments section, so that the voices of people can be who don't know where to go are able to speak their mind, knowing that it will be heard. Don't let this opportunity go away. Second, and to the point, Eisenhower Elementary School has had a catastrophic failure this year, as shown and demonstrated by the mass exodus of trained and generally beloved teachers and staff. During the board meeting on May 22nd, the staffing report for next year was released. On it, it showed 14 vacancies, but it did not note the true number is at least 15, as the third section of senior kindergarten was cut. Recently, the district released a document showing that the rate of change of personnel in the building. According to the most recent data I have been able to accumulate, let me illustrate for you the rate of change over the past several years. From 2019, 2020 to 2020 to 21, the rate of change was 19.6%. From 2021 to 2022, 21-22, the rate of change was 11.8%. 21-22 to 22-23, the rate of change was 25%. 22-23 to 23-24, the change is 45.6%. And note that the last figure is difficult to keep track of as it is constantly updated. As word spread amongst the parents, and thank you to those who were paying attention, there was general distress. That includes me as I began to organize parents to listen to staff as to why they are staying or leaving. Superintendent Means convinced me to let the district use a third-party to perform the investigation. I agreed because it was the best way to confirm that it was the data set that the district, the board, the building, and the PTA were all able to work from in order to provide support in whatever form that may be. My understanding is that in this report will be released on June 30th. It will be released to Principal Manzacani, Superintendent Means, and myself concurrently. My understanding is that as soon as the report is released, it will become a public document, and I will share it with whomever would like to see it. The purpose of that document is not to pin the blame on any one person, as it is plenty of blame to go around. What's more, the blame will not solve the problem, but actions resulting from the failures identified will prevent it from happening in the future. To the board, I have talked with a majority of you already.
Hello, my name is Lisa Valenti Jordan, and I also live at 3159 Knoll Terrace. I have a first grader at Eisenhower Elementary, now second grader. To the board, we've talked with the majority of you already, and I look forward to continuing those conversations. The refrain that we've heard from you is that you didn't know what was going on. That's fair. We didn't understand the magnitude of the problem until May 23rd, when we saw the same document that you were shown on May 22nd. The people elected you to know where the larger problems are and to be making sure the district is addressing them. You are making the policy for the district to execute. You need to know this stuff well before the general public does and have a better answer than that. Chris has spoken with Superintendent Means a couple of times in the past 2 weeks. I know that Eisenhower is only one building in the fleet of buildings that this district is leading. We get that you have a big picture in mind at all times, but if one of the ships is in distress, it is your responsibility to know and have a plan of action before there is a public outcry. For example, we had the Culture Amp results in March of 2023 and the results from the annual school report card in November of 2022. Why weren't more resources deployed then? You also knew there was a significant personnel issue and shortages in February and March. Why weren't additional resources deployed then? If the people of the Fisher Building are the leaders of the district, lead. Don't wait for someone to point it out to you. We have worked with Principal Mansicani all year. We've met with her and Principal Carter regularly, and we still didn't put together the puzzle until resignations were finalized. That is a failure of communication coming from the front office that needs to be fixed. The parents and the PTA have been in the role of a booster club and not a vehicle for advocacy for a long time. With as riled up as we currently are, however, advocacy is inevitable. We need clear and concise communication as to what you need so that we can advocate for solutions that actually help the situation. Right now, parents are motivated and ready to make changes. If that is not directed, it foments into anger, which is useful to no one. To the teachers at Eisenhower, we are sorry we put it together too late. There's nothing we can do to help that now. But we can do what we can to help make our school a place you want to stay because we want you to stay. To the parents of PTA and Eisenhower, the blame does not stop with the people receiving a paycheck for their work with our students. We failed too. We didn't put together how egregious the breakdown of the situation was until it was too late. There are still parents out there that have no idea that this is happening. This is unacceptable. I know some of us are denying that last statement. For lack of a better model, we're going through the grief cycle. I get it. We went through it too. It's important to take time to acknowledge what we are feeling, but it doesn't end there. Together, we need to figure out what we did or what we didn't do and how we can fix it. What's better is that there is a vehicle to channel our emotions into actions.
Thank you.
My name is Kevin Hansen. I live at 2450 North 120th Street in Wauwatosa. I'm also a parent of 2 kids at Eisenhower Elementary School. To continue on with the comments, we have a plan for engaging each of the levels above, providing support to the parts that we can, and advocacy to where we need to. Ultimately, the success of our plan relies on the number of people that are involved. If it is just us and other super active members of the PTA, it's not going to work. We're all volunteers and we have jobs and hobbies that we'd rather be doing, but we are getting involved. All of us will be volunteering during school events and in fact, helping the PTA as much as possible so that we're not just simply helping kids with a coffee or a cool beverage in hand. If you want to listen to this and don't know how to get involved, you can email Chris at president@tosaikepta.org. And finally, I do want to acknowledge openly that communication has increased significantly for both the building and the district in the last few weeks. Parents, including myself, are engaging. The goal now is to pivot from reaction to a proactive footing to figure out what the next steps are. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Melissa Kavanaugh. I live at 12021 West Chambers Street. I have currently 2 children one going into Whitman, one going in, staying at Eisenhower. And I've had 2 others that have gone through Eisenhower and Whitman. I just want to start by saying I don't buy the fact that nobody knew what was going on. May 8th, I stood up at this board meeting virtually, and I read a letter to everyone stating the fact that teachers are having issues with students in the classroom, and they are having problems getting through to the district leadership for assistance and aid. We were down almost all of our supports. We were down aides. Teachers were left to fail, and they were set up to fail. They asked for help again and again. They were sent emails, they were sent strategies, but emails and strategies don't do a lot for a teacher in a room of 24 students with one chucking stuff at their head. They needed assistance way far and back in the fall. They went to the district, they went to their coaches, they received no assistance. This is not a reflection of the students. The students that are in Eisenhower are being set up to fail because the adults that are supposed to be taking care of them, that they are relying on, are failing them. And the teachers cannot continue to go to administration and not be heard. Listening sessions happened with teachers and our principal, but teachers fear for their jobs. They don't want to speak up because they don't think that they can get through. And that's a huge shame. As of Thursday, we had 13 resignations, 13 available positions. Today, 16.5. We are continuing to lose more and more staff. Thursday, we are promised by Dr. Means that we will receive a full-time SEL teacher, that we will have a full-time school psychologist, that we will have a full-time allotment for a school social worker. I want to know that that is for sure going to happen. We need full-time staff at Eisenhower. At the end of that meeting, it was quoted that Dr. Means said, the teachers better perform.
Good evening. My name is Sarah Torgerson. My address is 1307 North 118th Street. I have an incoming 5th grader at Eisenhower, but I have an incoming junior at West and an incoming 7th grader at Whitman that have all gone through Eisenhower. To finish Melissa Kavanaugh's quote, the teachers better perform when we give them all that they're asking for. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Chisabanger? Yes, sir.
I just want to clarify for the record, the commitment is not a psychologist, but a full-time social emotional learning specialist. So it would be a full-time, I've made that commitment. There will be a full-time SEL specialist there along with a full-time social worker at the school. And that full-time social emotional learning specialist is in addition to a 0.7 that's already been allocated there. So it'll be a total of 1.7.
Dr. Means, there was an email that was recently sent to Mr. Bauer, just I believe this afternoon. I wonder if you might share portions of that email that might address some of the things that we're hearing tonight.
Well, I think I'll start with the last comment of, I shared it at the listening session that took place, I think it was June 8th. We've never withheld personnel from schools that have identified that's what they need. Ranging from this past fall when our secondary schools were struggling with behavioral issues, we deployed deans of students immediately. So if staff are indicating to us that they need certain resources, we'll provide it. It's hard to deploy those resources during the school year. The job market is such that in education, if you post a job in February, it's unlikely that you're going to get someone who's going to leave their current job and come to another school system. So I think what happened at Eisenhower to a certain degree is that we had positions that were never filled, and that made things difficult. There was also some personnel issues that, and I think we've tried to be very transparent with the Eisenhower community and have a running list of over 20 frequently asked questions that we've just answered directly. And I think we had the timing of a difficult personnel issue happened right when things became more challenging. But I think what you're referencing is that in the communication to the PTA president, as of December of 2022, the culture amp data that's been referenced, there were really positive scores that came out of from the staff in regards to how the staff, viewed their principal. In the scores, I think it was like a 75% rating of staff saying that they felt valued by their principal. I think there was another rating of 81% said that they feel that they can collaborate and work with their principal. So I think there were the data from the March culture amp data, which we didn't receive until mid-April. And Dr. Massacani didn't have a chance to actually unpack with her thought partner until I think it was almost April 18th, showed a very different response from the staff. So the change in the data from the December 2022 culture amp data to the April data was significantly different. I don't know if that's what you were referencing or not.
It is. And I wonder, and I'm sorry, Mr. Meyer, not to interrupt. I just was also wondering if you could go through some of the things that have been committed for next year, just as to highlight the responsiveness.
Sure.
And Dr. Means, sorry to interrupt. If you could also.
Well, excuse me. I tried to speak and you interrupted me and said you weren't going to, and now you've interrupted that. So can we have some order here in what board members can speak? I know we all respect each other and everything, but it's getting kind of free for all this year.
I didn't mean to interrupt you, Mr. Meyer.
But you did.
He didn't finish answering the question
Liz
I asked of him.
Interrupted you. And so sometime in
Mr.
this
Meyer,
queue,
you can speak. Sorry.
you're not chair.
Nobody
You don't
meant to.
decide either.
Nobody
I
meant to
get it,
interrupt
right?
you. Please speak.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask Jenny to continue her questions. And then Mr. Meyer will come to you, and then Ms. Rollins will come to you.
Thank you.
So again, there's been an increase of 1.1 FTEs in social emotional learning specialist support. It'll be a total of 1.7. There's a commitment to a full-time social worker. That's not anything new. The school always had a school counselor, but we believe that a social worker would be better suited to address the needs that we're seeing in the school. We've decided that based on some of the challenges that the teachers and the students dealt with the first grade cohort, that from a learning perspective, it would be best to have 4 sections of second grade for that cohort versus continuing to keep them in 3 sections. Today, we also looked at the enrollment numbers and have decided we need to go to 3 sections of senior kindergarten as well. That's not in this list, but there will be 3 sections of senior kindergarten. There's a total of 5 special ed teachers who will be at Eisenhower next year. That's an increase of 2 special education teachers. So that's another add that we've made. I think PTA president appropriately identified that there's a need for team building between Dr. Massicani and this new group of staff members who will be coming in. So in working with Mr. Brightman, we've increased the personal services budget for Eisenhower for team building purposes and events. There's been an external coach assigned to Eisenhower. It's a retired principal who also worked for the Department of Public Instruction RTI Center, who is an expert in developing classroom and school-wide management structures. And we've added two other things. One is a full-time general educational assistant, just to help with the general management of the school, ranging from having someone there for playground supervision to supporting teachers with whatever need they have. And then finally, we'll start the school year with a building substitute teacher. So typically, even in the first few weeks of the school year, teachers will be out of the building for various reasons. And so instead of putting Eisenhower in a position where they have to be in the queue and sign up for a substitute teacher, there will be someone who's assigned there every day. Our goal, our vision is to keep that building substitute in place at least through the beginning of November. So that's the menu of resources that have been identified and allocated to the school for next year.
Mr. Meyer.
Dr. Means, you, once you had your feet on the ground, have never denied resources. As you were arriving with the Jefferson School incident with the principal and two teachers resigning the day of conferences, and you didn't have your team in place yet, you sort of walked into a situation created before your time. So I fully support your statement that you have never withheld resources. In fact, my understanding is that you have placed a number of resources into Eisenhower in the course of the year that perhaps it wasn't as visible as what, to everybody. And now you're putting more resources in the building. My question then becomes, are the intervention strategies working? And that we'd have to understand. We can put all the people in the world in the building, and if our strategies and guidelines are working, great. If they're not working, then we need to understand that. So, and thank you to the board. I just got a little uncomfortable interrupting. I don't want to interrupt either, man, as I know the rest of you did as well. So thank you.
Mr. Meyer, all I would say is that I regret that, and I've shared this in the listening sessions that I've had with the families. I think that there's been this misalignment of, from a district perspective, we've defined what we define as support and what teachers who are in the classroom every day, as that's been cited here this evening, when you are having things thrown at you or you're dealing with a real challenging situation, how staff members who are in that position are defining support. There's a misalignment. And my perspective is that I hear the Eisenhower parent community and teacher community loud and clearly. Let's give the staff what they need so we don't have to have this situation happen again. It's not, at the core, it's not fair to kids. It's and obviously we never want to see staff leave because of circumstances that if we could fix, we should. So I'm hopeful that this additional level of resource can be the start of a new pathway.
And may I just complete adding my support to you, Dr. Means, that, and I've seen this with your statements to the board since your arrival here. Now we will have this investigation result that is coming up, and you will do your assessment of whether the strategies are working or whether they need to be changed. And that, to you, I'm voicing my support to you and sharing with the community will be the day when Dr. Means brings his courageous conversation to the board about what he thinks we should do to make things better. And then the board will have to accept or not accept. And I've seen you, Dr. Means, and heard you make those courageous recommendations to the board in the past few months, particularly with regards to expulsion proceedings and the board's handling of decisions and expulsion hearings. You've said some very pointed things to me that have changed my approach in an effort to hear you and support you. So I look forward to what you have to say to us, all of us, about how to fix this, because you are our educational leader. Thank you.
Summer.
Thank you. So I first want to thank all the parents. I know I've gotten dozens of emails and phone calls over the last 2 weeks. I've met with Dr. Means outside of our regularly scheduled meetings to talk to him about it. And I can promise you, I have thought about Eisenhower for hours every week and what we can do differently or better. And it's good to see all of the support coming from the parent population at that school. I want to try to lower the temperature because I've gotten many tones in the phone calls and emails that I've gotten. It is difficult to have parents tell us that the board isn't doing anything or that the staff isn't doing everything that they can do, because Dr. Means and this district staff, they're amazing, and they want 100% of our students learning in safe, inclusive environments every day. We missed the mark at Eisenhower this year, that's obvious. But at no point was anybody on this board or in this room not listening and looking to see what we can do to make Eisenhower better. So I want to ask the community, when communicating to other parents or family members or community members, it does a huge disservice to discredit everybody in this room who really works every day and in the buildings to do the best we can for students. I try to be as respectful and responsive to all of the emails that I receive. I know my colleagues do as well. I think it's a difficult place to start when someone's telling us that we're not trying our best, when I can promise you, I spent all weekend like racking my brain and putting together these timelines to say, where did we miss? What did we miss? What data weren't we looking at? I promise my colleagues were doing the same. So if we want to move forward positively, and I think we all do, I think when we talk to each other, when we email each other, when we communicate with each other, I would just ask that we come from a place with assuming best intent, because I promise everybody up here has best intent for every one of our students and staff members and everybody who comes into our building. So I trust what Dr. Means has put into place and what the team has put into place for the rest of the year, throughout the summer, at the beginning of the school year. I really believe that it's going to be a great start for Eisenhower. I also believe that if it's not a great start, that Dr. Means will put everything that he needs to into that building to make sure we get there. Again, thank you. Always feel free to reach out to us, but I hope that we can move forward with a relationship that we're assuming best intent from each other.
Couple quick things for the community. One, know that we certainly as a board have been getting updates ongoing. Both the communication's been going to the parents the board has been getting, as well as additional information from Dr. Means sharing kind of response and so on. The board is certainly concerned about the retention data of the teachers, wanting to make sure that we've got really highly effective teachers in every classroom and that we've got exceptional staff in front of all of your children. I'm concerned about the numbers that are leaving. And so I know that there's and expect there to be a high level of recruitment and efforts to make sure we've got great teachers in Eisenhower and in every one of our buildings. The board's going to have formal updates about the situation at Eisenhower June 30th. And this is for my board colleagues as well, June 24th and August 21st. Some of those will be during board meetings. Some of those will be written reports that we get from Dr. Means, providing us kind of ongoing updates throughout the summer. I'm also aware that Dr. Means and Principal Muscani are going to be meeting with the ongoing conversations with the community, providing updates. There's things like the dashboard that's available and additional items that you will have information in real time. So I'm happy to see the transparency that is consistent with what I've seen since my time on the board with Dr. Means, that information is out there and the board is paying attention. It will make sure that this has continued to be a focus. There's also been kind of comments and concerns about the disciplinary framework and making sure that's being implemented. So we'll make sure that that is a conversation that continues to be raised up, and Dr. Means reports back to the board. Certainly the board expects that the framework is something that's followed. And then things that I will be certainly looking for: what is the school growth plan? Are we seeing student growth? Are we seeing achievement of those markers? What do student growth scores look like? Are the children at Eisenhower meeting their growth assessments? What's the school report saying? Forward scores, those are all lagging. But what other indicators can we look at and we get reported on from Dr. Means? And those will be things of, is the school doing ultimately what we're expecting all schools to do, which is producing a high achieving culture and atmosphere within the context of the school. Eisenhower has exceptionally high level of resourcing, more than any other school, I believe, in the district going into next year. So certainly the resources have been deployed to provide the supports necessary for the school to rebound and to have a really great start to the year. I agree with Mr. Meyer. We need to see results. Now we will end.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate the outreach that we've gotten from community and parents, and look forward to having that continue. I would ask if there's a dimension to your report in the future that might comment on, because I know what is being done is also attending to the questions about student and staff safety. And there was one very helpful comment about elementary school discipline and how that is shaped, and the way that elementary school children are supported. And I think just continuing to have something about that in the report. So how, the ways that the resources are being put into the school also support and show that commitment of our district to the safety of everyone in the school, wherever, whatever their part. So that's just the one thing. You've done amazing work. I've been so well informed. I continue to be informed. Like Liz, it's a lot of time, but the kids are really worth it. And that's why I'm here on the school board as everyone else. But I think, again, I do hear a theme coming out in some of the comments about that concern. And so I think, even maybe bringing a little bit more of that out where possible.
Yes, ma'am. I would say yes, and having spent a few hours with the Eisenhower community last week, there's a line that has to be crossed as well. And what I'm going to say may be in opposition or in conflict with what Mr. Pinion would say. But what the disciplinary framework is in place. So when we have situations where staff or principal believes that they have children, regardless of their age, that they have children who are causing a safety concern, so I'm speaking for myself as an educator, I need the disciplinary framework followed. So in most cases, a student with special needs, you can maximize their suspension days by 10. Once you hit 10 days, then you have to have a conversation around the placement. For a regular education student, it's 15. One metric that I need to make sure that all of our schools are utilizing is that framework, so I can see, do we have children who are exhausting their 10 days or 15 days respectfully? Because then that's going to put pressure on Mr. Pinion and his team to say, well, maybe we need to find another placement. I want to make sure that all kids are in their proper placement. I want to make sure all kids are in their proper placement. And so if a staff and the principal deem a child to the point where that may not be the proper placement at that time, I need to know it. And I think to Dr. Jessup Anger's point, the only way I can know for certain is if the disciplinary framework is implemented. Again, I would suggest to you that what I just shared may not be in total alignment with where our Division of People and Family Supports with land, but I'm also a former principal and I'm a former principal as I speak to the Eisenhower community who did lunch duty at Eisenhower this spring and had to say, here's the order that we need to follow. So sometimes for elementary age students, it is a hard message to say, sometimes to regain the trust of the faculty and the students and the parents, sometimes you have to ensure that students who are chronic challenges are receiving the right placement and the right services that they need. And sometimes that may not be in that school at the time.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. That was a tough conversation right there. That was to all of us, and you are our leader, and I don't know how to fix it. That's you do.
I need the behavioral framework to be followed. If that is followed, then I now have a metric, because I think it's been referenced. I have to look at the macro. If it's not followed, then I don't know. Then it's more anecdotal, and it's more, I heard things are happening. I need that followed. If it's followed, then now I can see what's happening across the district. That's why it sounds boring when I say, well, we need more data. It's not for data's sake. It's for now I can measure to see where are those trend lines. And if the trend lines, and it's not to be punitive, it's to say, so where do we need to deploy the resources? That would be helpful from my perspective.
And quick follow-up, that is exactly what many schools have worked on this year, and there's more work to be done.
I think Mr. Pinion will say, he has a really big presentation on August 10th. What he would say is that what he walked into is that every school was defining discipline differently, and the way that we were entering the data was it was almost like garbage in, garbage out. And so they've spent all year trying to figure out, how do we report the same data appropriately and fairly?
Dr. Means, and then I'll go to Dr. Hoyk. One of the things that I will continue to ask for is what tools that you need for whether it's alternative placements, alternative schools. I know that there's very limited options available to the staff on where to place a child in a place that they can be successful, to make sure that they've got the supports they need, that teachers can engage in the classroom. And I know that there's examination, exploration of an alternative location site in our district. That's not something that during my time on the board that has been offered within Wauwatosa schools. I know that there's work on that, and I want to let the community know that that's happening, and that you and your team are examining that of how do we make sure that we've got locations and spaces where children can have supports they need to be successful. And wherever we can have students in classrooms, there's value to that. And sometimes there's moments, and many moments, where kids can't be successful in a traditional classroom setting. So please come back to the board as you continue to do that work, and that work by Mr. Pinion and his team is ongoing, so that we can find ways to support that, so that you've got the tools to provide those resources. Dr. Hoyt.
Thank you. Questions about the disciplinary framework, because this is a relatively new thing that we just kind of went live last fall, maybe not even at the beginning of last fall, but
Last fall.
Okay. So what I'm hearing from you, I think right now, is that maybe the utilization of that framework has not been as consistent as we had hoped. But it is a new framework. And so I want to better understand and maybe this isn't a today conversation, but as we go through the summer, I'd like to really better understand, where is that framework failing? Is it in the reporting? Is it too cumbersome for our staff and teachers? Is it the levels don't make sense? But to better understand what it is so that we can tweak it if needed, or provide professional development if that's what's needed, to help us have more consistency next year.
It doesn't need to be tweaked.
Okay.
If a child is chronically having challenges with the framework, now you're not hearing from the superintendent speaking. You're hearing from a former principal. If a child is frequently and chronically breaking the rules, we need teachers who are reporting those students to the office to then have the discipline carried out. And then we need the principals to actually implement the behavior. And so for me, if a child is in the middle of a fist fight on the playground, regardless of the age, that's a 2 to 3 day suspension minimum for me. What we don't need is someone saying, well, I see there's a minimum and maximum with the framework. Why don't we do 1 day? Or why don't we do an in-day suspension? When you start recalibrating the framework that way, now the data that I need to receive to see if there's chronic challenges is now watered down. And that's the challenge. The reason why we put the framework in place after my first year is because I could clearly see the discipline was dependent on the school that you were in. And so there was this inconsistency across the district of how are we even discussing the concept of discipline. I think we're better this year, but I think there's still more work to be done. And I think the other thing, and just to answer very quickly to Dr. Jessup Anger's statement, I have a teacher advisory council that I meet with every month. And when I shared with the advisory council that we were looking at an alternative placement center, the teachers were excited, but then my elementary teacher colleague said, so does that also pertain to elementary school students? When I said no, they were concerned. They believe that we could use that type of center and opportunity and resource for elementary school students as well. Again, I think that's going to be more of a philosophical conversation, but just know that ideally from a resource standpoint, I think that's something we need to explore.
If there's, and then we'll go back to public comment.
Dr. Means, when we're looking at the disciplinary framework and the data that comes from that, I also want to put it out there that we should be looking at the students who are impacted the most by our disciplines framework and making sure that not only are the students in the right place with the right resources, but the staff is also getting all of the training that they need so that we don't have that unevenness in the students that are being disciplined.
Agreed. Yes, ma'am.
Any additional comment from in the room? I know we've got a few hands up online as well.
My name is Nicole Dabrowski, 2212 North 116th Street. I have 2 boys at Eisenhower and 1 daughter at Whitman. Just want to say thank you for sharing everything about the framework and all that you're doing to just try to be transparent with everybody. But to me, the disciplinary framework sounds great if you have the staff to implement these plans. Right now, it seems that the more important focus should be how we're recruiting and retaining the staff to implement these frameworks. Is there, or could we see an action plan for that? Thanks.
There is a plan. And I know we've received some feedback from some families of the amount that we're offering for our signing bonus. I know a neighboring district is offering $4,000 for special education, signing bonus of $4,000 for a special education teacher. We're offering $3,000. I think this is the first year that we've offered this type of bonus, and so we're excited about offering it. I think the PTA could be a great assistance to us in that we're holding a Eisenhower specific job fair next week, Thursday on June 22nd, being on site, showing these prospective candidates that this is a school community that is supported by parents would be helpful. But you've heard me make the statement to you earlier and constantly that I'm a former HR director as well. I've kind of gone into HR director mode, and we have a plan. We have a plan on how to recruit, where to recruit, what to screen for. We've become very aggressive in making sure that we have the right people hired.
And for Eisenhower parents, I know there's a dashboard that's available online where you can look at how many people have applied for positions, when interviews have been conducted, primary interviews, secondary interviews, reference checks, and that's being updated. My understanding is on a daily basis. So I've seen updates over the last several days of kind of where things are at. So you'll be able to follow on in real time and certainly continue to keep your eye on that.
Hi, Sarah Norberg, 2550 Normandy Lane. Quick question regarding, everyone keeps saying that this is like new news, like the things that are happening at Eisenhower are new news. And so that's concerning. This is a school that is 3 blocks away. And so my question is, as a district, what are the systems of checks and balances so we don't get to the situation where we have 45% of our staff leaving in May? What could have happened? It's hindsight now, so it's hindsight 2020. But what is the system of checks and balances so that we don't have this situation in the future in any of our schools, number one. And number two, we have a whole lot of postings, which is great. And there's a whole lot of staff allocated. And I love the idea of like, you know, dream big and plan big. But we also know that there is a staffing shortage, particularly in the world of education. When I came out of college, and I applied to Wauwatosa, there were probably 300 applicants per one position. Now we have the flip of that, where we have, 30, 40 positions to one applicant. So what is the plan when we have this pie in the sky plan of all this FTE allocated particularly for Eisenhower, and we don't have the highly qualified staff who are available to take those positions, number one. And number two, what's the plan to support the team building? If you have more than half of your staff that is new, to get them allocated to curriculum, school culture, district culture, all of the things that take in place when we're seeing already shaky leadership. So what is the plan to plan forward? We can't plan backward, but we can plan forward.
So we have a social media campaign that will be launched that will remind candidates of our job fair on June 22nd and continue to recruit people. That bonus that I referenced will be available to available candidates through August. And I guess my concluding statement around the recruitment component of things is that we'll continue to advertise in spaces where we think candidates may be interested in working here in Wauwatosa. I think what we've learned post Act 10 is that teachers are more open to selecting a school community and district that is more aligned with their values. And I remember vividly last year when we had our new teacher orientation, and I asked the question, I ran an activity and asked, why are you here? Why did you pick us? And many of them said, because of the community values. So I think that's what Liz was trying to communicate earlier of, we're all parents here. As a dad, I empathize and I'm hearing the feedback from the Eisenhower community. I wouldn't want my daughter to go through what has happened there. And so just know you have an advocate here. We all want what you want. And then the last comment that was made in terms of how can we learn from this so we see the red flags sooner. I think the red flags, and again, I shared this with the PTA president, when you look at the timeline of how things unfolded at Eisenhower, it happened quickly. It happened extremely fast. And that is something that we're continuing to talk about internally in terms of how and why did it turn so quickly. When I look at and Culture Amp data is just one piece of data. But when I look at the Culture Amp data from December of 2022 to when we were able to unpack that data and on April 18th, it changed significantly. And I think that was telling us something there. It was post the district presenting a staff member for hire, because that took place on March 13th. So we'll continue to look at that aspect of things as well. I guess the last thing I would just share, and then I'll turn it over to my colleague, is that there's other data points. Mr. Meyer referenced this earlier. There are other data points that I will need to look at and to ensure that we have the right plan in place for Eisenhower moving forward. While the state forward exam data will be embargoed until about November, we will have it internally, hopefully by the end of this week, if not early next week. That's a data point I'm going to look at. I'm going to look at the school growth plan as well. I'm going to look at discipline data, and the feedback I'm getting is that there may be a misalignment between what our disciplinary framework should have looked like for chronically misbehaving or students who are in challenging situations and what the actual data looks like. So I would just ask that allow me to look at other data points as well as we're continuing to analyze this situation. Sarah, I'm sorry.
Oh, not at all. Good evening. I would be remiss if I did not share just one point or one strategy related to effective recruitment and hiring, not just in education, but especially in education these days, where we know there are a shortage of educators and we're competing with other very local school districts. The most effective way to go ahead and recruit and retain educators is for each of us to work in our networks to recommend coming and teaching and working in an organization, in a school. So each of us plays a part. While I am the chief of talent for this organization, and I will be everywhere talking with staff members about working here, every one of you as parents, as stakeholders, all of us in this organization can effectively contribute to our efforts to fill our vacancies and recruit staff members.
What I would say is, I can't speak to the history of how many people were applying for positions in Tulsa a decade or two ago. What I can say is, in looking at the numbers they were at the low end for, I think, one position for maybe a music teacher. Is that the specialist position?
A music teacher position.
A music teacher position, I think, had 12 applicants, and I think most applicant positions had 30 to 40. So there certainly are applicants applying for these positions that are actively in the recruitment phase.
But as the community members stated, we know 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 30 positions, we would have had 3 times that amount. So there is a different landscape in education.
I think I would just add in there is that for the community and all the parents, I hear you. I'm reading your emails. I'm getting your voicemails. And just listen to you now, especially, empathy is not enough to get anything done. But I think we've got a double-edged sword. I think some of that is really coming down to, we can't be our own worst enemies. You know, our parents, our neighbors, our friends, the people in the community. What I'm saying, and I've recommended four teachers from Lake Mills to Pewaukee to Waukesha that are friends and relatives of mine and in-laws of mine to come here. And one of the first things they come across are the Facebook pages, the inflammatory language between communities and neighborhoods. And then they see the next doors, and then they see all these other things. So it makes them think twice. And so I'm always going to challenge myself, the board, and all the dialogue that we have is that to be the best proponent of getting those teachers and taking care of those ones that are still here and taking care of those ones that we want to come in and to save and salvage and have any boomerangs come back in that may leave this year, that hopefully that may come back in 2 years. I can have high hopes that way because I have high hopes for those that love and protect and take care of our children in Eisenhower now, that if they do leave, that there's something that they can come back to. Chris, I read your email multiple times. I had a long flight this week, so I got to pick a lot of that stuff apart, and I didn't respond to a lot of it because there's a lot to unpack there. But it's nothing that's going to happen overnight. And I think some of the disconnect that we see that happens from something that happens in January or March or May, we expect that there's going to be instant gratification. I think a lot of the data that we do have access to and a lot of the information we do have, it takes time to unpack that from the school level, the principal level, here at the district level, to the superintendent, to the board level, in order to trickle back down, because there are a lot of parts of that filter that's got to get back down through. And I don't think any of you would disagree with your kids in what you're feeling, that being in that grief state, it's a horrible place to be. but we're trying to find a place where we can get to agree that there's something going in the right direction. I think I'm hearing some of that positivity and some optimism there from the listening section, from at least what I read from the beginning and what I've watched and listened to from the transcripts and what's gone on since I was able to be there. But I'm optimistic that we'll be able to find a place to recruit those teachers. So when the first day of school comes around, we don't have 13 or 14 or 18 or 20 vacancies, that we're going in the right direction. And I think the stuff that we're doing here today, the conversations, the feedback that you're giving today is going to help us get one step closer to it tomorrow. And then we come back for our meeting in 2 weeks. We're going to be a whole lot further there. And then when Ms. Selazowski comes out and brings us more data, and when Dr. Means has more data, and then the board president has more data that we can bring and do the things behind the scenes, behind all the closed doors, before we have our meetings and all the homework that we do, I think we'll come out with outcomes that are more than satisfactory for getting us in the right direction. Not 1 or 2%, but in larger strokes and 20 and 30% at a time. Because we're going to take, same thing I tell my 8-year-old, how to eat an elephant or hippo, one bite at a time. We got a lot of bites here. You guys have pointed all those bites out, but we have to make sure that we're ready to take those bites, and then we can do so that we can digest those bites. We can put those things to work. Thank you.
I don't know the process. Can I speak again because it was short?
You only get one. I'll give you an extra 2 minutes because I think you already finished.
And I don't need 2 minutes.
Yeah.
I just have to. Okay, I'll say my name again. Sarah Torgerson, address 1307 North 118th Street. Just based on all of our conversations, I just have a few comments. The first, I will trust and I believe that you do have our best interest. It's not that I disbelieve that. But I will also verify. And that's my job as a parent, is to verify that you are doing what we are asking, begging you to do. Okay, so you have my trust, but you will see me here to verify. Okay. With regard to the elementary school discipline that you spoke to, Lynn, Eisenhower did have resources. At the beginning of the year, we had a school counselor. We had a social emotional learning staff member. They left. And from January or February on, they were non-existent. And that's why we're in part in the position that we're in. So you're right, we need that staff, and Eisenhower needed it and did not have it, thus the position that we're in. With regard to the first grade cohort being split into 4 classrooms, at the listening session, it was mentioned that Plan A was to use the third SK room in order to staff that, or to house that cohort, and to split that cohort up because of numerous reasons in that grade. Plan B was, sorry, Dr. Means, I'm going to go there again. Plan B was to take the art room and use the art room because Eisenhower doesn't have room. We're an old building. We don't have enough room if you do that. Please don't take our art room. There is, our art room is from 80s, 90s. It's not like the new art rooms. Our kids need art. All kids need art, and whatever you can do to not have that happen. My 5th grader, he's not a big art fan, will probably say, "Mom, why are you saying that?" But so please, let's ensure that Eisenhower can keep its art room for its amazing art teacher who currently is staying. And I hope that by June 15th, that doesn't change. Thank you.
Kendra Kovar, freshly retired teacher. A lot of the comments that are from Whitman Middle School, a lot of the comments that are being brought up tonight have been the history of Whitman for the last 2 years. We had 30 plus people leave Whitman last year and a significant amount the previous year. Many of the resources you're adding to Eisenhower were allocated to Whitman last year. Unfortunately, some of them came a little too late because 3.75 positions were cut in spring, and then they were making up for it during the fall. The disciplinary framework is a great piece of paper, but like you said, it was not followed in some of the places. And I'm wondering if that's because buildings were not properly trained on how to use the framework, with significant feedback throughout the year as to how they could improve their ability to use the framework. So I guess a simple analogy would be in my classroom, if I was to assign an assignment, not give clear directions and not give proper feedback on multiple practices, and then assess them on that and they failed, I would look to myself as failing my students. And I'm wondering if Fisher is going to look to themselves to see that all buildings are adequately trained on how to use the disciplinary framework properly and given adequate feedback, rather than be brought up at a school board meeting that everybody was using it inconsistently, because that's an unfair assessment.
Jamie, I think we've exhausted public comment in the room. I see we've got 2 hands up online.
Yes, we do. The first is Carrie. You have the microphone. Please state your name and address. Carrie, you will need to unmute yourself.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you. Carrie Sykes, 2672 North 114th Street. Thank you, everyone. Everyone included who has given comments tonight. I appreciate it as a parent of Eisenhower students. And I have a similar question to what the individuals just mentioned, and one of the earlier individuals on the checks and balances. The district and the board were aware of some of the behavior challenges, one of the largest numbers in the entire district back in February or March. And then there was, as parents, we found out there were some teacher evaluations filled out in information available in March. So my question is essentially, what could be put into place to kind of prevent what has occurred in the future? I would prefer this not happen in the district in the future. Obviously we can't go back. So just wondering, could we have gotten more creative as a district and internally rotated staff or something, just with not being able to hire a full-time one? Is there anything else the district could consider for the future to try to prevent this from happening again? And then is it possible the district could have stepped in or realized or coached Dr. Mansukhani that maybe she needed additional resources added even at the latter part of the year, or potentially needed help further that she couldn't immediately provide from a behavioral standpoint? Again, just wondering, can the district confirm if there's anything that they could do to help in those areas in the future? Thank you.
Thank you. A couple points of clarification I want to have. If you haven't got a chance, and I don't know how much has been shared. I know I've read things that have gone to the PTA president and things that have gone to the whole community, and I don't always have recall of who's seen what things, and I certainly don't know things in the audience. But I think it's sometimes helpful to understand, to take a look at the timeline of things and when staff were deployed. And one of the things that when we get the report on June 30th, that the board, and I know Dr. Means and I've talked about, is what can we learn from this so that we've got things in place that will alert the staff to make sure that we know what's happening. And when I say we, the board is a step removed. So we're kind of the community accountability mechanism. And we're talking policy and resources, but Dr. Means, his staff, that principals are supported. And those things are in place at a much higher level now than they were when I arrived on the board. That doesn't mean that things always go right. This time, something went sideways at Eisenhower that we need to understand and fix and make sure that the supports are in place. I feel like I timed myself there. And I'm aware that there were staff in the building providing those supports, and still we've got things we need to learn from here to make sure that schools are really in a place where they're thriving. And as I said to Chris, I had concerns long ago at a high level with the outcomes of Eisenhower. I would expect that building going back to 15 or 16. I don't know why it hasn't performed at a higher level academically. And that's something kind of leading into the pandemic. Or as I think review coming out of the pandemic, that's an uncertainty to me. So there's this acute situation, but there's a longer term issue too of a culture. What does a thriving school community look like? What does really high outcomes in a school community look like? And those are things that I think as a board member, I will be looking at to see, is the school achieving at a really high level? Are the kids successful? Are the families articulating success? And what are the metrics and markers that we can look at? So I think those are things that we have to really consider as we look at going forward. And that's a responsibility of the board to make sure that we're both providing the resources to the staff and holding them accountable to make sure that we do that. And certainly I have no doubt the community will hold us accountable if we're not doing that ourselves. We've got one more online comment.
Sorry, I was muted. Deb Falk-Pallick, you have the microphone. Please state your name and address.
Hi, good evening. Deb Falk-Pallick. I am one of the officers of the Wauwatosa Council of PTAs. And at our last meeting, the Eisenhower representative came and kept apologizing for taking so much time. And we assured her we wanted to hear her voice. It's a great forum within the Council of PTAs, which is comprised of representation from all schools in the district. And I feel Dr. Means is pretty honest in those meetings, saying things like there is inconsistency in the disciplinary framework across the district, not just at Eisenhower. He does tell us to hold him and his team accountable. And I want to just encourage those PTAs and families in PTA to come to the council to hear different things. At our last meeting, we had Sarah, the HR director, and there were 3 schools that brought up problems, inconsistencies with LEAs in IEP meetings. So those are the sort of things that we just can't push aside. Those inconsistencies across the district and in certain schools need to be addressed. And I'd encourage board members to come to one of the meetings and see what's going on across all the schools, the good stuff that we're doing and the things that really need some help. I do believe, like Sarah said, that all hands on deck are needed right now for recruitment. I am wondering if in the consent agendas where we list the resignations, the new hires, the transfers, if there can be a link posted in there to all openings so that we all know where to find the openings, not just at Eisenhower, but every school. Currently, I know that we have a transition, and I'm going to tell you why this is would be helpful. Because we currently have a transition coordinator position posted. And I had seen in a group I'm in that another school district that actually shocked me is laying off staff in special education. And one is a transition person. So I quickly said, hey, we have an opening here. I know we do, but I need help with figuring out how to, if you just post all of the openings, it would make the community help with the hands on deck. Strategic goal number 4 is high quality staff. This is specifically about that transition coordinator position, which is a new position. I noticed that I'd like to see, and I'm suggesting that we put in there for the requirements of that position, a transition certification, either right. Transition certification required or preferred. I'm going to really stress that HR should reach out, for example, to UWW, who does these certifications in transition, to let them know we have a job opening here. Objective 4.3 with the talking about the compensation for our staff. It includes our special education aides, and it lists comparison districts, one of which is Elmbrook. On May 9th, in their
excuse me, Deb, I think Dr. Jessup Anger is trying to say something.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Your time.
Yes. Can I just have 10 seconds?
Let's go 5.
All right. May 9th. May 9th, 2023, just to help you out. Elmbrook just approved an increase for their special education assistants starting at $18.95 an hour to $25 an hour. We gave our assistants an increase earlier this year, which is great, but it might be time to look at what other districts are doing again. So there you go. Thank you for that time, extra time. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Deb. I think I'm going to do an editorial comment here. If Wauwatosa received the same amount of money per student as Elmbrook, equated to the number of students we have, we would have $6.7 million additional money. So that is one of the many things that allows Elmbrook to literally be able to pay its staff at a different level. So I know we just did a 12% increase to our staff wages. I don't think we're as high as I think some of us would like to be. We've got a state budget that's not what we had hoped. Looks like it's going to be signed. One of the things I know that there's also a lot of teachers who live in Wauwatosa who aren't teaching in Wauwatosa schools. And so I'm wondering if we might actually send a targeted email if we're able to determine who those parents are and see if there's anything we can do to recruit TOSA school district parents to come teach, either those who are currently teaching, those who are currently out of the workforce, who may be looking at coming back, and what we might be able to do. I have no doubt that TOSA parents are really committed, and maybe life is as such that they just have chosen not to teach right now. But if we can maybe start there, that seems like a really substantial pool.
Can I say something quickly, Eric?
Yes.
So I also want to thank the parents for your engagement. As Mr. Meyer mentioned, Jefferson was in crisis last year. And, as a parent, it's my responsibility and obligation to advocate for my children before anything. So, I've shared this with the parents that I've talked to, that I empathize with you in a way that I understand what you're going through. You are your child's number one advocate. And Jefferson, so I talked to Dr. Means, like, what did Jefferson do? Like, why did we get through this? Like, how did we quickly, not face what we were facing last year and really turn things around? And he said it was through, parent engagement, but really positive, supportive, collaborative engagement. And so I encourage you guys all to stay involved, continue to advocate for your kids, but do it in a collaborative way with your principal, with your teachers, with other family members, where it really becomes just this beautiful thing that everyone is centering around students and giving them the support that they need. I'm happy to talk with any of you about the things that we did. I mean, we had parents step up and become building substitutes. We had regular meetings with our new principal, just making sure that we were going to start the year off right, because, we needed to come together as a family and as a team. So thank you for your engagement. Still continue to reach out. I'm happy to talk with any of you. And again, you might not see us at some of these engagement sessions, but we are engaged and we are listening, and we are having meetings with Dr. Means and his team and asking the really critical questions of how do we support Eisenhower to make sure that they are off to a good start next year.
What I'd like to propose is taking about a 10-minute recess. If anybody wants to connect with any board members right now, you're welcome to do that. If you're kind of talked out, that's fine too. But we'll take a beat here. Board members may want to use restrooms or whatever else, but we'll be here if anyone wants to talk, and then we'll continue on with our meeting. We'll come back at 7:30.
So just to be clear, we're through with public comment on non-agenda items now?
We are through with public comment on non-agenda items.
Nobody wait around and
Public comment is closed on non-agenda items. We will be moving forward with consent agenda. We resume our meeting with the consent agenda. Are there any items, Jamie, and we are live?
Correct, we are live.
Thank you, sir. Are there any items on the consent agenda which board members would like to remove for separate discussion and action? Seeing none, may I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Thank you. May I have a second?
Second.
I'll give that to Dr. Worley. Any board comment or questions on this item?
My only question, I'm not familiar with the Southeastern Wisconsin School Alliance. And I know it's something that's on our consent agenda, and now Dr. Means has stepped out of the room. Oh, do you know what that is?
I know a bit about it. I think Ms. Wilscan and Mr. Who's also not here. Is not.
No one's here.
So I will let, the question is, share a little bit about the Southeastern Wisconsin Schools Alliance and what is it and what is our engagement with them?
So SWSA actually originated out of a group that was called the SLCC. It was an organization that was originally formed, Mr. Meyer will remember this, to advocate for Chapter 220 and the Chapter 220 legislation at the state level. It then morphed into SWSA as there were non-Chapter 220 school districts that felt that state advocacy was important. SWSA has a very rich history right here in Wauwatosa that we would meet in conference room B. So all this metropolitan leaders would come here in person and meet. It has evolved over time. It is an organization that provides significant information on information that's relevant to districts in the metropolitan area. There is a lobbyist. There's an executive director that provides information to school systems that pay a annual fee.
Tuesday morning, 7:30, once a month, there's a conversation that generally happens that I know as Legislative Advocacy Committee often will get kind of ongoing updates on that. I was certainly doing that, getting that. And tomorrow, I believe they're meeting in person.
They're meeting in person.
It's the first in-person meeting I think we've had all year. I can't make it. I will be actually with Senator Hutton tomorrow morning, but I thought that would trump SWSA,
But it is open to any board members.
It's open to any board member. Just be careful. We can't have a quorum there. Traditionally, if you are a member of the Legislative Advocacy Committee, it's a natural connection. And there are other school board members from other school districts from the metro area that are at SWSA meetings as well.
I'll say Faith Vanderhorst is the new executive director, and she's just really good about sending out information. So like
former school board member.
Yes, and former school board member. Just WSD updates around the budget. I mean, just updates on things that are very relevant to public education in our region.
Thank you. I want to say a small comment. I believe the gentleman donated a trombone. I apologize for the trombone players, and wanted to say thank you.
I only have one question about in the consent agenda, the investigations 3-year subscription. I was just curious if that was just the elementary level or if that was multiple grade levels for that piece of software or that.
Dr. Marvel?
Sorry. Yes, that's investigations is our math curriculum at the elementary level. And so by doing the 3-year subscription, that will get us in line of where we will then have a curriculum renewal.
Okay.
Any community comment on the consent agenda?
Kendra Kovar, former 8th grade teacher at Whitman Middle School. I'm just commenting on the consent agenda because I'm listed on there as a resignation, even though the WRS recognizes my 30 years of service as a retirement. And I've spent more than half of my years in public education in the Wauwatosa School District. And now I know I'm not here long enough to receive the benefit package that goes with the district. I came in here, late in my career, and I do understand that. But with new people in HR, maybe there should be something for future people who are leaving the Wauwatosa School District with 30 years invested in public education to maybe be acknowledged in some way, small shape or form. Because I am not considered a retiree from the Wauwatosa School District. I am considered a resignation. So I guess I had a resignation party on Friday and not a retirement party. But that might be something you might want to look at after someone investing 30 years of their life in public education.
Ms. Kovar, thank you for your career. I have heard from lots of parents about the impact you've had on their kids. So thank you for the commitment you've made, whether it's in our district or anywhere else in the state of Wisconsin or elsewhere. Thank you.
I want to echo that too. Thank you for your advocacy for our students. I know that you always have them at the center of your work, so thank you.
I want to add that I recently had the opportunity to share a classroom with you during High Interest Day and got to see you interact with some of the Whitman students and thought, wow, this is great. And when I saw you on the list, I know that's a loss for the community to lose a teacher that has so much experience.
Jamie, anything online?
No, there are no hands raised.
Please call the roll.
Dr. Worley,
Yes.
Mr. Morris,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Anger,
Yes.
Dr. Hoyt. Yes. Ms. Heimer Rowland,
Yes.
Ms. Willis.
Yes.
And that item passes. Next up, we have several items on operations. The first is discussion of the preliminary 23-24 school year budget. Mr. Brightman and Dr. Means.
Thank you, Dr. Jessup Anger, board members, community members. We will be very efficient with our time. We want to just share with you that overall, the budget position of this school district remains strong, despite some disappointing news we've heard from the state legislature and the state government regarding the biennial budget. Just remember that this board in the past, this community has been very fiscally conservative and prudent. We don't short-term borrow. Most school districts do. We have a very healthy fund balance and cash position. Most school districts do not have it. So what I want to start by saying is very clearly, we will sustain ourselves through whatever is going to happen in the next 2 years. What we are more concerned with is the future. And what does the future look like beyond the next 2 years? And I think that's part of this presentation as well. So we'll get started.
So may I please, about the short-term borrowing, that we don't short-term borrow in the long run, it does not mean that we spend less money. It means we don't get behind.
That's right.
Right?
Yes,
so it gives future boards flexibility to make decisions without having to be encumbered by the past.
Yes.
That's so just, okay, thanks.
Yes. That's a really good synopsis of the advantage to not short-term borrowing. We just have a few quick facts that we would add. The actual portion, school district portion of taxes.
So for the public, there was a meeting on the 31st of June. Several board members were there.
Of May, yes.
Of May, sorry, June 31st. Is there a June 31st?
No.
Yeah, it really didn't happen yet. And that was available to the community. It's available, I believe.
It's online.
It's online. The board were able to go back and review that, as well as ask any additional questions. And there'll be a period of time between now and the next 2 weeks before the preliminary budget comes before the board. So lots of information online. That was the first time the district staff has done that meeting for the community. Thank you for doing that. And I just wanted to call attention to that again.
No, thank you. It was our pleasure to even provide the information, and again, it is online from May 31st. And so again, Mr. Brightman and Mr. Brightman, as you all know, is our Chief Financial Officer, has been doing a fantastic job. I want to also give a lot of credit to our entire cabinet. There's portions of this presentation that they've contributed to, and that includes Ms. Ellis, who's not here, but also contributed greatly to this presentation. I think it's a very comprehensive document that not only gives you the current state, but the future state, and why this information is so important. We don't want to spend a lot of time reading slides to you. I would start with this quick facts slide of you will see that the actual school district portion of taxes have decreased on a home valued at $350,000 in Wauwatosa. That 74% of our operating budget is dedicated to personnel. And so that's the sizable portion. That we continue to receive great financial audit findings, and that we're one of only 11 school districts with a And help me again with how financial people say that a one double A, or is it
Double A1.
double A1 rating, bond rating. There's 425 school districts in Wisconsin, and we're only one of 11 with a double A1 bond rating. That's something that we should be proud of. The next couple of slides just go over our strategic plan, and I would hope that people have spent time visiting with our strategic plan. Ultimately, we just want to center the conversation around we have a budget to support the strategic plan. That's the purpose of what we do year in and year out. If it's not meeting the needs of our strategic plan and all those different components, then we're not investing the funds appropriately. You will see that there's a slide that says strategic goals. We have something called the vision of a graduate 2.0. There are milestones that you're able to identify, that we've identified, I should say, as a school district to determine if we're making gains towards our strategic plan. And those milestones are measured. They're not fluff. I think some school districts typically have strategic plans and they don't measure if they're making progress towards the goals or not. We've been very transparent in outlining what are those milestones and are we meeting them. You can look at the milestones from a district perspective and also by school. And so if you utilize that hyperlink, it'll take you to the milestones. We also have school growth plans. Those school growth plans are on the district website. Each building principal is given the responsibility of ensuring that there are goals around academic performance, culture and climate, and closing disproportionality gaps. Those are the three goals within a school growth plan. We have a school growth plan progress tracker where we are able to show school communities, is your school making progress on those goals? And so that will be released on the district website later this summer. You'll see our school report card scores. That's just one metric that we use to measure if we're making progress or not. There are other metrics that we utilize, but I think it's important for the community to see how have we been moving forward as a school district, but also at individual schools. Which then gets us into School Finance 101. And I'll turn this over to Mr. Brightman to go over the funds.
Okay, and we'll start at this level and then we'll go to the more spreadsheet looking document after we talk through a few slides here. So funds 10 and 27 are what you think of when you hear what we heard tonight with the public comment, when you think of what we do as a school system, where we pay our teachers, it's either out of our general fund or our special education fund. So that's fund 10 and 27. Is look at those, but everything from utility costs to our facility maintenance to our copier vendor, all the things are paid out of Fund 10 is the largest fund. And Fund 10 and 27, again, are all the operations that you think of. Fund 41 is where we can and have levied dollars separately. It takes away from our capacity in Fund 10 to do so, but that's where we put dollars for some deferred maintenance for facilities and that type of expenditures. Fund 50 is the school nutrition fund, and that's a proprietary fund, business-like enterprise in the district. We want that fund to make a profit every year so we can reinvest in equipment and keep things up to date without having to go to the general fund to pay for those things. And then Fund 80 is primarily for us, our recreation department costs. There's some other miscellaneous costs in there too, but you can do other things. We've talked, futuristically about maybe having some type of daycare operation within the system, whether that's for staff and or community, or however we want to structure that. But that kind of thing would go into a Fund 80 as a separate tax levy to offset user fees for other programs that are within Fund 80, within a program type operation. But that's how things are laid out. Every district in the state has the same account structure. So as we start to look at where we fit and benchmark with our neighboring districts and statewide, we can go right to these same funds and we all report the same way and can pull that data and benchmark very easily. So that works out really nice. The budget overview slide, within our general fund, you can see that that's our largest fund with $85.9 million current year, 22-23, and going up to just under $93 million for next year. And we'll go through an itemization of how we got there to that number in a slide or two. That's a large difference from one year to the next. And as you know, we've put in new teacher compensation structures. We've added some staff this year to provide the supports that we heard about, at one school, but district-wide. Throughout the school year and last school year. And we've done the 12% increase on our teacher compensation. So all of that into the mix shows a year-to-year difference of 8.2% as a net change for our general fund expenditures. Likewise, in Fund 27, going from $14.2 million to $16.8 million for next year. That's a $2.6 million increase, or just over 18%. And again, that's mostly adding staff to support the needs that we have within our system. And so you can see just from that, there's direct resource alignment going on with our strategic needs. And we're putting kind of our money where our mouth is with things that we think we need to do as a system. Fund 39 is our debt service fund. This is where we pay off the debt that was issued back in 2018, 2019. And you can see every other year we don't have a debt payment. That's the defeasance that we approved at the last board meeting. And the benefit of that is kind of working within the state formula to optimize where we fit for our taxpayers within this community. So you'll see a $20.5 million expenditure last year, and then nothing in the next year for an expenditure there. Fund 41, our capital investments, again, we had a $700,000 expenditure budget approved for the 22-23 school year. We'll be requesting $2.2 million for next year. And we're not going to be levying into that fund for next year within the recommendation that we have. So that is spending down the reserves within that fund that can only be used for deferred maintenance purposes. And that will get us through about 4 to 5 years of spending doing that approach to that fund. Fund 49 is the spend down of the referendum funds. And so we started last year with $4.9 million. We're ending the year with about $2.3 million that still will be spent down. Much of that will be over the summer. But we want to run that out over the next fiscal year so we can just kind of close that fund out and be finished with all those costs. Any remaining funds that we have that are unallocated, we'll bring back to the board for a recommendation, and we'll likely prioritize school safety within that. Some other community uses, we've talked about updating the technology within the space. That kind of expenditure can go to the referendum funds, but we'll bring that back to the board for approval at some point as we look at those items. Fund 50, you can see we have an increase of about $600,000 from last year to next year's budget. That's going to be spending down some of the fund balance or reserves of Fund 50 to replace a freezer refrigerator unit at Whitman Middle School. It's original to the structure. It's built into the building. It's an old school, old style facility that's been there since the school was built. So that's about a $300,000 item in itself. And then we have some other equipment needs throughout other schools that need to be replaced. Dishwashing machines, ovens, that kind of thing that just come and recurring. It's kind of a good problem to have in Fund 50, but during the COVID years, there were larger federal reimbursements for free reduced lunch. In fact, all lunches were at no cost for about 1.5 years. And so us, much like most districts, built up some additional reserves there. You can only have so much in reserves and be compliant with the federal free reduced lunch program. So we have to spend down $600,000 in the next year to become compliant with that, but we have the needs for that. So it was part of our planning anyways within that. And then Fund 80, there's really no changes to that. We're not recommending any significant changes to the program costs or revenues for that program. As we get through this end of this fiscal year and see the summer programming, if there's a need to update that for the October budget adjustments, we'll bring that back to the board, but nothing in the mix for right now. So any questions on that so far? Okay.
The next slide is just a distribution of where staff are located and what positions are they located in. We thought that this would be a real important slide to provide to the board and the community, where you can see where we're investing our dollars. The vast majority, over 60%, is in teachers. But then you see other areas in which staff members are distributed across the district.
And going back to that stat on the key facts in one of the first slides, 87% of our staff work in schools supporting student learning in that respect. Staffing plans, we've talked about quite a bit at the board table and put out publicly for the public to view, for our staff to view. And I think that's just shows the increased transparency that we have as a system as we do that kind of thing. And we just give out more information to people so they can see how we're making our decisions and being better informed with how we staff and resource our different schools. The old pie chart, right? So we have to have at least one or two of these in here. So as we look at the revenue side of the equation, you can see 55% of our general fund revenue comes from property taxes, and then 28% comes from state sources. That could be equalization aid, it could be the per pupil categorical aid, but all the state sources in the mix. 13%, which is significant, comes from open enrollment revenues. So those are students coming into our district that we get those revenues for. And then a smaller piece of that pie is the 4%. And that's everything from student fees to the athletic gate entry fees, all those miscellaneous things that happen. So as you can see, as we talk about where are we resourced, the two largest pieces of the pie are where it comes from, and that is the state budget process and the budgeting on that side that we'll talk through. The board did make a decision to downsize slightly the open enrollment seats that we have from the current school year to next school year. That's about $546,000 less in revenue that we had in the year prior. And so that's just eating away a little bit that piece of pie, but it is significant. $11 million is a big share of our budget. So we just need to keep that in mind as we talk about different levels of non-resident students. It does have a direct budget impact with what we do.
Question on the non-resident students. Is the virtual academy included in that, or is that separate?
No, those students are counted in that count for non-residents.
Does this pie, Mr. Brightman, how does this look different in other states that are maybe have better state funding?
Yeah, so it would look different in different states. Wisconsin does not have what you call a foundation aid, which is common in most districts, where the state funds 8%. So Wisconsin touts that 2/3 funding. It could be that. It could be whatever ratio they set within that state. And then there would be other state and federal sources to that. And then it would be local property taxes that might make up the difference, but it would vary by state. Not included in this is a more general fund look, would be the special education aid that we've talked about a little bit, and we will on the slides tonight too, but that is directed just at special education services, and that's where Wisconsin lags very low compared to other states.
So without a foundational budget or foundational program for funding in our state, depending on if you are in a property-rich community or not, the burden on the local taxpayers are higher in some communities than others.
Correct. Yeah. In Wisconsin, the 2/3 funding is the state share, which ours is 28%, but across the state on average, it's 2/3 state funded. So you can see we just don't fit as well into the formulas because of the property wealth behind each student. So we're 55% are property taxes versus being about 1/3.
We've made significant investments in personnel and supporting schools all year. And I won't read all of these to you, but we're proud of the investment and the additions that we've created that can be highlighted on this slide. I think it's just another component of us executing our strategic plan and also ensuring that when there are needs for staff or for students that we have answered those requests. I'm most proud of the increase in common planning time for teachers at the elementary level and the increase in art, music, and physical education, which goes hand in hand with that process. But our elementary school teachers did not have common planning time. And what I mean by common planning time is that if you are a member of a 3rd grade teaching team, we never created time for those 3 teachers or 4 teachers to meet at the same time to plan for future instruction. We did provide common planning time for our secondary teachers. Normally it's the reverse. Most districts make sure that the elementary school students and teachers, I should say, have it first, then secondary. So we're really proud of that component of things. This is what I believe, in addition to the increase in teacher compensation, creating the environment where teachers feel as if they can plan in a way where they're not rushed is very important. It's a work environment enhancement. Just moving forward, where does the district need more financial assistance and support? So we know there are needs, and our administrative team have gone through where are those needs. And again, I don't want to read off the page to you, but there are significant needs. I think Dr. Jessup Anger referenced earlier this evening, there's a neighboring school district that due to their tax rate and how they've structured their revenue limit, they have $6.7 million more to spend on education than we do and have about the same number of students that we do. And so that places the district in a disadvantage. And so the things that you see on this slide and other slides, many school districts they have in place that we do not have in place.
These are all competing interests. So we kind of heard that tonight of needs that we have, but then what are we going to do to help fund it? So something may have to go away to fund something else, and that becomes a difficult process to go through.
So can I comment on this, please? If you go back to the slide, and I've always kind of looked at things like this. The enrollment history showed, and I don't know if this is still true, we have to look at it from year to year, but kindergartners, once they're here, tend to stay here because people don't like to move their kids around. So as we're prioritizing these, investment in, and I've heard recently that, JK is the new SK. It used to be senior kindergartners. Whatever the resident count was for senior kindergarten, it would tend to persist up through 5th grade. And then we'd have a bump for middle school and then a bump. So as far as what to spend our money on first, that's sort of like seeding for more state aid income. If we can get those, and whatever year in their life development a child starts in public education, if we can get them in our buildings, the theory is they stay. And then because that generates more state aid, we have the money for more money for the other things. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir, I'm sure. But I would strongly argue that we push money to those starting years to get those kids here. And then that snowballs into a financial benefit for us for all the other things on our list.
So with this slide, and maybe you already have plans for this, but with this slide and maybe some others, I may bring this up again. Given what has been outlined as likely state aid, how are we, I don't want to say losing out, but how is it more difficult to meet some of these needs that have been identified in the district? I don't have to answer that now, but it would be helpful to have some real specifics or talking points or ways to understand that a little bit better. And you may have those already.
Yes, I think we'll show that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
So all I would say is that I would just ask board members in the community to take a look at the ongoing needs on the second page as well, as we've identified needs around facility and maintenance needs and teacher and employee compensation, and where we are with our instructional technology program. We have needs that we've done a deep dive and an analysis of our school system and know that we could do a better job in these areas. So moving to the next slide, where are the blind spots? These are just 3 areas in particular, but we know that there are blind spots in how we staff our curricular materials and professional learning for teachers. We've heard tonight that professional learning is a real important component to ensuring that we are moving all in the same direction. We haven't done a good job in that space. We have made no commitments to transportation as part of the TOSA 2075 task force, but if we were to offer transportation in our district, that would See the difference there of almost $2.3 million. There's been a lot of requests over this year around data, and I think there's an assumption that we have the ability to pull the data quickly. We've been able to do it because we have really an amazing team of people who are working with the data, but they're understaffed. And I think when you look at the data culture that we want to create, along with the team that Jamie Price and his technology team has in terms of right-sizing technology. We don't have a lot of technology coordinators and technicians to support our Chromebook initiative. Those are all challenges that we consider to be blind spots to our budget. So again, how do we demonstrate our financial responsibility? We're AA1 district, one of only 11 in the state of Wisconsin. We also have a history of clean audit opinions. In other words, there are auditors in school districts. There are auditors who come in every summer and they review every aspect of our financial books. And what they've seen over the years is that how we're maintaining our books are very clean. What we're doing with the mechanisms we have in place to utilize district funds is appropriate and moving in the right direction. So we're pleased that we have been deemed to be a financially strong school system. I'll let you go over this slide. It's your slide.
Yes, we've talked a lot about legislative advocacy over the last several months, and I think we've talked about this slide with the full board. I know we have for the community what we did on May 31st. But really, it's the state budget process that produces revenues for schools in Wisconsin. The bottom of that upside down pyramid is the local school board. The local school board really has no say over the revenues that come into the system other than to authorize and operate a referendum. That's the only say that the local school board has. And you can't decide the referendum, the community decides that. So the local school board, that's their role in that decision making. So we rely on the state budget process, which is this every 2 years annual budget. We rely on the state constitution, which mandates adequate funding for public education as part of that. But then again, the state government, the governor comes out with a budget proposal. The legislature processes through that through the Joint Committee on Finance, which is happening right now that we started talking about with the previous meeting on the legislative advocacy. We expect to have that Joint Finance Committee release their budget possibly approved by them tomorrow afternoon. So we've heard some media reports, some individual legislator and the governor comments on the budget starting last Thursday afternoon and evening and Friday, but we've seen nothing concrete yet. So we're going off conjecture for the most part, but it's credible conjecture. Where it's coming from. And so we'll talk about some of those key differences. You know, a budget is a plan, a spending plan and a revenue plan that's as good as the information that we have to put as far as inputs. So we'll talk through where we landed with those inputs and where they will change or likely will change with the state budget process coming up also. Anything else you want to add to that?
No, I just, the only thing I would add is that I think often people misinterpret the authority of the local school board, and not to be demoralizing to you this evening, but the way that school funding is structured in Wisconsin, you're only, the most power you have in the budgeting process is to identify what to reduce, what to cut in the budget. That's the most authority you have. You don't have the ability as a body to generate more revenue. If you do decide to go to a referendum, the public votes on it. And if there's more revenue given to the school districts through the state legislature has provided it. So I think often the public has this perception of the school board can do certain things. The way that the state has structured funding, they've taken a lot of power away from school boards.
Okay. And this slide shows where the budget, where the surplus position is at the state level. So the state gets general purpose revenues, comes in through sales taxes, through fees, through other tax mechanisms, and that goes into their GPR, general purpose revenues. And it creates, if they don't spend it all, a surplus position or their own state fund balance, so to speak, which is currently about $7 billion with a B. On the operating side, if you just take the state revenues minus the state expenditures, they have a $6 billion, actually $6.9 billion operating surplus right now. And so within that framework, we crafted, the district did and the board did, a legislative platform that stayed within the means of the state's financial position and funded the needs of the district that we had. And so as we talked to the scenarios, the scenario on the legislative platform is fully funded, and the one just shy of that is not. We'll get to that in a couple slides down here. But the state has clearly underspent and put away some dollars in recent years. And as you know, we're coming off of historic inflation, which drives up those general purpose revenues on the state side. So the money is there to fund what we're requesting. Within our priorities then, we tried to be very specific and narrow in what those were. And the first one is the key one, and that's CPI-based revenue funding for schools. If they go back to that being the funding formula that started in 1993, went all the way through 2009, that provides a sustainable, yet not over compensated system where it overtaxes over time, overtaxes CPI or the inflation index. So as you can see, the light blue areas of that bar chart are where the state has underfunded those revenues for schools based on CPI. The second chart you see there is the special education funding. And again, Wisconsin trails the national average, where we're under 30% right now for special education funding reimbursements. The request was of the governor and of our legislative platform to go to 60% on that. The state's long-term request was to go to 75 to 90%, but 60% for this state biennial budget. And then we all know the issues with student mental health and the increasing trends there, and putting some resources to that. There may be some resources going to mental health with this. There's a slight tick up from 30%-ish up to 33%, we think, in the state budget that the Joint Finance may approve tomorrow. And there's some movement on the per pupil, but not getting up to a CPI level. It's CPI would be about 880. We're hearing about 325. So just over a third of that CPI need.
Mr. Brightman, can we pause for a second about special education funding? And if you want to say wait on this, I can wait on it if we've got a deeper dive into it. Is now an okay time to ask? Okay. So I had a really long conversation with a special education parent this morning, about 2.5 hours. And it was around, I think we were both flabbergasted at the lack of resources the state is choosing to put towards special education reimbursements. And it's a really hard, gross, nuanced conversation to have, because we are both, I think, legally and morally obligated to make sure that our special education students have the resources they need to be successful. There's no question about that. There's no debate on whether or not it's the right thing to do. It's just the right thing to do. We saw our budget is going up about $2 million in staffing for special education, and there may be more in terms of additional services needed. We know that we had a huge influx of students, increasing levels of eligibility in the district for special education this last year. So more students screened, more students identified, and that's good. Students are getting the services and supports they need. For every dollar that goes from our budget to those students is a dollar that isn't going to the full student population. It's a zero-sum game right now in the state of Wisconsin and the way our budget is constructed. And the grossness of the conversation that me and the special education advocate and parent was talking about is we both need and want to, and we are not going to stop making sure that the special education students have the resources. But what we had hoped for was a 60% reimbursement of those from the state of Wisconsin. And our legislative platform was asking for less than I think anyone else that I saw in the state of Wisconsin. That may not be accurate, but most were asking for substantially more resources than we were. We were trying to come in with a conservative, like, we can live with this and we'll figure it out. And I think it's really important for the community to kind of understand the position that we are now placed in when the state isn't meeting its obligation around special education. And my understanding is they have committed to reimbursing at a much higher level than they actually are. There's been repeated opportunities for them to address this. I'm not aware of any educators in the state of Wisconsin who don't believe that they should. I haven't seen any polling that says divest in safety or education from the state of Wisconsin. I could be wrong, but I haven't seen any. I haven't talked to any neighbors who are saying don't invest in K-12 education. And we are going to be, well, we are a healthier school district financially than most. This isn't looking good in the future. And Mr. Meyer, to your point, previous boards have set this board up to be successful, to have these additional resources that we can use with our fund balance. We're a unicorn. Most places don't have this. And so even we are moving to a place of not being in a healthier place. 2 years are okay. And the chart on the left, I suspect, I know we don't know final numbers yet. We got, in essence, zero additional spendable funds for the last 2 years. The legislature recognized that they needed to make that up, and so they did something that they couldn't legally do, so it didn't happen, which was, I think, set aside $400 in each, was it $400 total?
$400 per student.
In each year or total?
Total, yes.
So it's egregious what they're proposing.
Well,
and I'm...
So I appreciate your advocacy. I think what we didn't, we can jump there now. I think the complexity of this, the negotiations at the state level with what we presume to be the K-12 package is that what was associated with that negotiation was funding for shared revenue for the city of Milwaukee, Milwaukee County. And, you know, we sit in Milwaukee County. I think Governor Evers would say that he was in a really tough position and he had to make some difficult decisions. And the information that I've been provided is that Milwaukee County is in dire financial, they're in a dire financial position, that they could go bankrupt in a few years with some of the services that they offer, that the city of Milwaukee was in a terrible position. I'm not trying to justify what's going to happen to our students in Wauwatosa, but I am sympathetic to the position the governor was in. I think it was a very interesting negotiating tactic to couple K-12 education with the shared revenue conversation. We were fearful that that was the plan. We were hopeful that maybe they would come to a resolution on shared revenue and then come to K-12 education. But I think in a very shrewd negotiating tactic, Joint Finance and the leaders of a certain political party tied it all together and really forced the governor to make some decisions. And those decisions have been made. And there are your description is one way to describe it. I think I think the governor has tried to articulate it this way, that there are positives that we should be happy with. I wouldn't go as far as saying we should be happy with it. I think they fall short of what our goals were. But I also understand that when you're in negotiations and you have to make tough decisions, I would never want to second guess or put a level of criticism on the challenge that I believe both the majority leaders of a certain party and Governor Evers had to work through.
But is it fair to say that
I'm not buying it.
I'm trying to be very neutral in terms of our approach so we can,
right?
I appreciate what you said, but yes, I'm trying to be neutral.
But fair to say, I think that if what we hear is likely to happen really does happen, funding for public education is now falling much heavier on each community.
But someone would make the argument, so yes, Dr. Hoyt, there is more responsibility on local communities to decide what funding looks like for your K-12 public school system. But the system is set up that way. The system is set up in a way where, again, I think that's why Mr. Brightman's triangle or inverted triangle graphic is really important. The power that you have as a school board is to decide if you want to engage the community around a referendum conversation. But legislators will tell you very quickly, if you want more revenue, the way that the funding formula is structured, the way the formula and funding structure is situated, a community can always make more. You can always make the decision on if you want to invest more in your public schools or not. That's the decision of the local community.
So I mean, as a 7-person school board, we are an ensemble of voices. And I completely agree with what you all are saying about the state should provide more funding for public education. So I commend all those voices who are saying all those things. My kind of self-chosen little role is to be the voice to say, okay, where can we make a buck? You know, because we got to have the whole ensemble. So which is why I promote, well, let's get the 3K and the 4K, and let's, what can we do to attract enrollment? Right. And what are those things, you know, so those things I target those things. And while advocating like you all have been advocating, I completely agree with you. And just to add my voice to the ensemble, we need to make our money where we can. High school course offerings. We've so many years we've argued that it's the curriculum and it's the accumulated content of all the courses that but I promote, well, individual classes. A high school kid wants a class. They don't think in terms of what's in the curriculum. I had opportunity to talk with a California high school teacher, a science teacher, this past Friday. And I said, well, what do you teach? And she went, well, the class, my most popular class is called Medical Interventions. I said, well, what's that? Well, think of any bad thing that can happen. And this goes through for the kids how, you're in a car accident and your arm is severed, and or you have an allergic reaction, or you got a tick bite and now or a snake bit you. And she said, we fill those classes. The young people really are interested, and we take them on, we trips, and we really actually show them what as you go through your life, something happens. So I never would have thought, and I'm not promoting that class, but I'm just saying we need to do the things that, we need to sell what people want to buy from an enrollment perspective. And so I just want to throw that one, voice into the ensemble here. With that perspective. I'm also worried about negative tertiary, and I haven't heard much about that lately. And that's a much longer, more complex conversation, which is why we have this, what was the defeasance and, that even if we pass the referendum, is it going to be dollar for dollar? The money we get, we have some complexities to understand as a board, and I'm not trying to promote anything tonight. And then the idea of bonding. We have bonding authority without referendum to a point. I'm not sure, but what in the 2075 committee, what are all of our strategies going forward to be healthy? And bonding is long-term borrowing, not short-term borrowing, which is a different concept. It's not the charge card, it's the mortgage on the house so you can buy the house. So, leverage things like that where it makes sense. But it's a lot of confident Mr. Brightman can educate us on everything we need to know. But just to say, there's a lot of stuff here where we have some tools after the legislature decides what it decides.
Mr. Meyer, I think to respond to one of your comments, understanding what the wants and desires of the community are, whether it's through the 2075 task force or other methods. I think this is a year where we're going to need to be doing a lot of listening and engaging with the community in some creative ways as a board, because I think this budget is one thing. I think when we look at the next 5-10 years and where we want to invest strategically, what experience do we want TOSA kids to have, is going to be really important that we make these decisions as a full community. There are many options available to us, but we cannot do all the things that we're doing now in perpetuity with the resources that we will have available to us in the future.
And I want to say that it's not, and maybe we'll get to this, it's not just, so we're hearing, for example, tonight that people in the community might like us to do even more to attract the best teachers. But like, for instance, in the special ed area, but that additional 3% is unlikely to balance out the costs that would come with being able to attract the special ed teachers that we want in this community and to fill those vacant slots. And I think the community needs to have some sense of that, because it's not just our legislative advocacy, but it's everybody who is in the state that has a role with legislative advocacy. And the one other point I would make as an example would be the loss of funding on potential, not decided yet, but the potential loss of funding for the statewide Office of School Safety, where it was very clear in our recent election that school safety was a huge priority in our community. And the idea that more of that cost, if we want to continue where we are, like with the reporting system, that, obviously if the state can't continue it after December or can't continue at the same level, it potentially could come out of a guess to school districts to put more into that. I think we all need to really understand that it's not just that the funding request isn't being met, but there's also some places, what are those places in which some things might potentially be taken away that could then restrict us further. And I don't want to be, negative, but I think it's just super important at this moment. There's just this little bit of time left before all the bows are tied and everything is put out there. For people to think this through about what will and will not be available. And if we want to keep the same level of school safety and want to keep a system that's working, we're going to have to step up if the state's not stepping up. And that's just an example. There are probably others in the budget potentially that where the cost could potentially go up because things aren't being funded. Same thing with the incentives that we want to give to our teachers that raises our costs, and the lack of step up to 60% definitely has an impact for how we can make those decisions. Thank you.
I think something as simple as what you heard earlier this evening at Eisenhower. So if we are creating a third section of senior kindergarten and you have 4 sections of second grade, the Eisenhower community will say, so when you had the last referendum, our building wasn't touched for a new wing. Our building wasn't addressed. And so I think they would say, I think I feel comfortable in saying they would express, with all due respect to a new playground area, if we know that this school has been consistently in this neighborhood of 360 to 390 some odd students, how do you create 21st century learning environments so we don't have to juggle or make the Sophie's choice between, is it music on a card or art on a card? And I think those are varying, as I've been in the district, those are very big concerns that the community has expressed to me. So when the state decides that they're only going to give us $325 per student over the course of the next 2 years, that does impact the slide where we talk about Fund 41. That means we have less amount of money to put into Fund 41. I've worked in districts, Mr. Brightman's worked in districts where we've said, our Fund 41 is so healthy, let's start planning to build a wing. Building a wing onto a building is, while it's complicated, it's not that complicated. And I've been in districts where you can build a wing in a summer. You can build it on one summer and you create a whole, it doesn't have to be a brand new building, but if you can create a wing, it creates space where some of the things that some of our schools are asking for could be provided. It's something as simple as that, Dr. Worley, in terms of we don't even have the capacity to have those conversations right now.
Can someone remind me, so we did the facilities referendum, that we're still spending down the final stuff and we've still got some things happening. Mr. Meyer, I know you were on the committee, right when I entered the board, there was a deep dive. The committee, I think, identified, was it $350 million? Yeah. So $350 million were identified of things that the community-driven committee would like to do. We ultimately passed referendum for just a hair, I think 124.9 million as a community.
Yes.
A massive investment.
Yes.
And thank you to the community for doing that. So we've got some schools where we have schools that have what they need to be able to do what the teachers and the staff need to do. That also addressed less than half of what the community-driven committee identified. The 2075 group isn't a facilities committee, but that'll be part of kind of big picture. And it's another example of how do we, so we had 4 elementary schools that had substantial rebuilds. That leaves us with lots more than 4 that did not have that. Roosevelt, Washington, Eisenhower, Madison, Jefferson, Montessori, which is here. I mean, so this is a complex moment. And what I'm glad about is that we have the 2075 task force looking at who do we want to be? And let's have a really open, engaged conversation as a community of who do we want to be? And then we can talk about what can we afford? How can we fund it? How do we calibrate those things? But I think having really open, transparent conversations around priorities is really important. And I'm also glad that we're doing that in concert with work in the city.
So I'd say the 350, and we went to referendum for 125. There's a lot of argument that the gap wasn't fluffy stuff. That the proposal would have been for 7 new elementary buildings instead of 4, and substantial retooling of Eisenhower and Madison. And the retooling of Eisenhower and Madison was not as substantial as what would have been in the 350, as we referenced to tonight. There's things out there that are going to need to be replaced. The swimming pool capabilities, which includes capabilities to have swimming facilities for seniors because they need an elevated temperature in the pool, toddlers and seniors. And I'm in a senior position right now, so I'm not casting aspersions on anyone. So there's a lot that we did not do. And we need to revisit, as you're saying, as Sean Rollins said before he left the board, we need, what's the phase 2 here? And we need to address that. I totally agree with you.
And I think what I hear from the community almost weekly is that they feel that, and that's why I'm really excited about the Tulsa 2075 task force, they feel that they've been forgotten. So we've mentioned Eisenhower a lot, but I know we have 2 individuals who have close ties to the Madison school system, or the Madison school. Madison feels that they've been forgotten. That when you walk through that building, there's challenges. Jefferson has challenges. Jefferson has a lot of challenges. The roof is leaking. The roof leaks consistently at Jefferson.
Ruins in structural materials and
we know that that's happening. So I think in 2017, if we knew it was $350 million, that may have gone up. And when you consider And so not only does it go up because we just want to have good instructional environments for all of our students, it also creates a schism in the community of there are certain school neighborhoods and communities who feel, why did one set of schools get something that the other schools didn't get? And it's really awkward for us to be the new administrators to try to answer it because we don't know. We know on paper it says that there were some serious ADA issues that those schools needed to address, and that was the logic behind why those schools were addressed. And I'm not here to try to relitigate why those decisions were made, but they were. And now we're living with this environment of we have a community, regardless of what side of town you live on, that are expressing additional needs. Wauwatosa East, so I'll go to the east side. Wauwatosa East there's some issues with that facility. Wauwatosa West hasn't been touched in terms of facility standpoint. It's a beautiful building, but there are some significant needs. And our middle school, as a former middle school principal, I don't even want to get started on the state of Whitman and Longfellow. So, and those are just facilities. So I don't want to belabor this point. I think we've made the point, and that's why it's so important for the state legislature to make these investments or not. And then we have the conversation, but not rush into it. I think a lot of school districts are rushing into these conversations and rushing to their community saying, well, if the legislature isn't going to give us certain funding, then we want to engage you. I'm really proud of the fact that we're being strategic and we're going to utilize the TOSA 2075 task force to hear all voices in regards to what's the next steps.
So I'll throw this in. To your point about significant things, yes, we have a new aquatic center at East, but we have a pool. We have 2 other pools, and they're going to need help soon. That's right, and that's expensive, folks. And then a very difficult trade-off in the whole process was that, for example, we were very scientific about how much we thought we could ask for and what the community would approve. And I sort of regret, you can't regret when you succeeded, but Roosevelt should have been a new building. That the piping and the electrical needed to be torn out and put in, replaced. And once you do that, you might as well, in that kind of building, the HVAC and the heating and the plumbing, it was shot. But the cost of the new Roosevelt was, from the World War II phrase, a bridge too far. We thought it would tip the referendum voting to a no, so it was left off. But that was a hard thing to accept, to spend all that money to refurbish the HVAC and the plumbing at Roosevelt without putting in a new building. And that was a tough choice that we did the best we could trying to figure out the recommendation. And so we're going to hit those kinds of choices as well. We're going to be penny wise and pound foolish, another old phrase, right? So these things really need to be thought about. And if we have one of those tipping point decisions, this time I'd say take longer and go to the community and say, look, we really think you only want to spend this much, but because we're only spending this much, that's going to happen in this one building. And we're going to put a lot of money into an old building that really should be a new building. But it's your call, community. You can tell us what you want. So, yeah, there's a lot of decisions to be made.
I think there's a lot of decisions that need to be made. And I think this community has expressed to me, at least, that there are high aspirations and goals for what they want it to be. Mr. Morris and I have talked about this. I want to tee this up for him a little bit, but I've run into so many community members who will say, why does a community of our caliber not have a field house and some type of upgraded performing arts center When I think about the technology at Tulsa West, we have Broadway caliber performances happening at Tulsa West. But I think Mr. Steffen would say, I should say, he's told me, here's the list of things that needs to happen in this facility. So next year, while Tulsa West is representing the state of Wisconsin, is the only high school that can perform Disney's Frozen. And I think if he had his druthers, there are areas where we could fix things. I just think we, as a community, there are greater aspirations. And I think that's a source of the tension and the frustration that we hear, that people know we need to be at a certain level and we're just not living it out.
Well, and the community also could perhaps understand the disparities that when you fix a school and then the ongoing impact of that when someone is looking to move to Wauwatosa, that it like reinvents itself. So where we want to go, where the attractive places to live, as we move forward, if we aren't doing work on these other schools, could easily, if it hasn't already, cycle into, I want to live in that neighborhood school area and, have a larger impact beyond the schools. Whereas what I'd rather see is back to what Mr. Meyer was saying, which is let's have our schools have a really positive impact on the people who live around regardless of their age. That is an attractive community to join. But instead, with how things are playing out potentially with the budget and what we have in front of us right now, it's a bigger step to get to where we're envisioning a school district, a community school relationship that brings greater value to even more than we already are. Not saying we don't, but even more greater value to Wauwatosa, more attractiveness in not the many points of light or unbalanced ways that we talk about, even academics, but in all ways looking at how schools help to strengthen that neighborhood. And right now that we have some schools that have just been named that really probably aren't helping strengthen those neighborhoods because they don't have the capacities that they need in order to do that.
So I want to move us forward because I think this is healthy. Keith, I would just ask us to jump to slide 25. So we've kind of alluded to this issue a little bit in terms of our budget planning scenarios. Again, just for summary's sake, the way that the funding, the way that the state builds their budget is that there's a group of 16 legislators that make up the Joint Finance Committee. The Joint Finance Committee is in essence the budget development group. They have listening sessions all across the state, all the different cost centers to a state budget have the ability to advocate to the Joint Finance Committee. The Joint Finance Committee, I believe the distribution is 12 Republicans and 4 Democrats that are on that committee. And so they have done their due diligence. They've been listening to the state and different advocacy groups across Wisconsin. Then it's their job to formulate and put together a budget. And what we have to do is, because that is typically not done before July 1st, we have to come up with scenarios. And so Mr. Brightman has developed scenarios that we estimated. If you look at scenario 2, and I know it's really small to see, but if you look at scenario 2, we were hoping and planning on a scenario where we would receive a total, now I'll use a total because it's easier numbers to deal with, a total of $1,000 over the course of the 2-year state budget. The information that we're receiving is that we will in essence receive $650 over the 2-year budget. We were also hoping to receive 60% of the reimbursement costs for servicing and providing services to our students with special needs. That what we're hearing is that we will receive more like 33%. And our special education advocacy committee and community they struggled with the 60% of reimbursement. And so to know that it's only increasing to 33% is a major loss. And so I'll tee it up here to let Mr. Brightman talk about, based on our scenarios and the reality of what we're hearing the budget will look like, what are now the new gaps that the state budget will create for Wauwatosa?
Yeah, so all this came out late Thursday into Friday. That was too late to really update any board items for discussion with that, but to give you an idea of the delta with this. So you can see in scenario one was the high bar. We didn't think it would be kind of that good coming out of the state biennial budget process. So we didn't count on that, but it was there for reference to show what we thought was needed to address what we were doing within the system and to have the resources that we needed to move forward. Scenario two, we saw as the low bar. And the reason we saw it that way is talking to legislators and really bouncing this off of them, they thought it would be somewhere between the two. So we didn't think it would be necessary to go further kind of to the right of where you see scenario two. But where you see the revenue limit per pupil line, kind of the first yellow row there, the 350, 650, that's going to be the 325, 325, we believe, coming out of what happens tomorrow. Then these look at special education aid at the 60% level here, probably that 33%. So if you go back and look at what does that mean dollar-wise for the revenue limit per pupil from going from 350 for next year to 325, that's about $147,000 less in revenue. So not a huge dollar amount for that one. But going from the 30% to 60%, that's about a $3.5 million reduction in revenues that we'll receive. So when I go to the next slide, you can see the bottom line impact, and we can layer those numbers on top of what we see here. So again, that first slide is the revenue side. Now we're looking at the expenditure side and some other things we've done internally. So the top part of this chart, we've done some things, and I've gone through this before, to navigate and be a little bit more efficient as a system. So I won't go through those again. The expenditure impacts, we've done some things where we've added additional student-facing supports. We've done things with compensation with various groups, and all things that we had to do. There wasn't a choice in that. We had problems with attrition. We had problems with retaining and attracting staff. We had to do some things, and we did do some things to get there. We then did the 12% increase to teacher compensation to help, again, attract and retain the staff that we have. We saw that as a true need. We benchmarked third lowest in the state, in Southeast Wisconsin with our teacher compensation. And so we're hoping to be closer to the median by what we've done to accomplish that. So all things we thought were our needs for the system. And then as you look down at the left-hand column of scenario two, you see there's a $4.4 million deficit starting position. If you layer on the $3.5 million from what we think is going to come out of the state biennial budget, we're about a $7.9 million deficit structure for next year's budget. And I just want to hesitate before we go to the second year of the biennium, because there's so many moving pieces within that. Until we see the actual language and model that, it's hard to quantify that. But you can assume that same magnitude would continue for year two within that piece. Anything else you want me to add for that, Dr. Means? But that's the magnitude of what we're seeing within all that. And we will update this for the next board meeting coming up. As far as once we can truly quantify based on hard information coming out of this, and we'll definitely bring that back to the board and update the financials and everything else to reflect that magnitude of the deficit piece.
And I guess the only thing I would add is that as a school system and as a community, I would just ask for us to think differently. And we discussed this a little bit at the Legislative Advocacy Committee. So often what school administrators do is we sit back and then we moan about what the legislature didn't give schools, and we wring our hands over what should have happened. And I think we have to get to a point where we're more proactive and we just realize that the legislature has a certain perspective. They're going to execute those perspectives. I think the legislature has indicated clearly that they really believe in tax cuts. And so though that balance, that access money that they have at the state level, they have deemed that could be utilized to provide residents and taxpayers a relief. That's a philosophy that I'm not here to debate. Our job is to focus on what can we do for kids in Wauwatosa. And I think so often school districts get wrapped up in the state politics of what legislators who are elected have decided to do. What we want to position you to think about as a school board and as a community is what can we do proactively to best meet the aspirations and the vision for Wauwatosa. So then we no longer have the feeling that we're not providing the needs and the resources that everyone wants.
And then the next slide just goes back to the discussion on fund balance and cash position. And you can see the ebb and flow of our actual cash position throughout a year. And based on the $4.4 million deficit on the previous slide, you can see that we draw down the cash position to 14.5 million. So if we add 3.9 million or 3.5 million to that amount, we're closer to that $11 million low point in our cash position. That's not the static cash, that's our low point. And so I don't think that changes our budget recommendation at all or our future planning. It just more highlights the need to look at alternative resource planning for the future. And so we've talked about there's really three options. There is we wait and see what happens the next 2-year budget cycle, which probably isn't going to be any better than this one. There's the operating referendum option the board can consider in the community. Or we can look at making reductions and doing the things that none of us want to do. And we heard a lot of feedback tonight on things that we want to do additionally. So it becomes a very difficult conversation looking at that. But that's really our three options that we have in planning forward with our resources. The second piece that was attached to the board docs item is the budget documents themselves, and much less friendly to look at than slides. The first page you see is the legally required publication and adoption format that the board would consider. 2 weeks from now, we'll update that based on, again, the state budget parameters as they come out. The state budget will not be approved by that point, so we'll be updating based on our best information that we have within that. The remaining pages of this document are a little bit more user-friendly. We refer to those as more supplementary information. The first page is on the total tax levy and giving an idea of what that looks like. These numbers are going to change because now that we have an allocation of state aid coming in the mix, that'll change the tax levy impact. The revenue limit authority will reduce what you see here a little bit. And then we'll factor in all the other valuations that come into that. But it gives an idea of what you can expect to see 2 weeks from now. On this trend, I don't expect to see it much different. It might look even a little bit better from a tax levy and tax rate perspective in what we see when we put all the numbers together out of the state budget, because there's less revenue authority coming in, so it'll have less tax authority. With that also, again, we'll update all these numbers based on the property taxes for our general fund and all the other funds based on what we see out of the state budget piece, which will impact then the variance between what we're seeing on expenditures and what we see on revenues. What I like about this document is I think it puts the budget into a manageable piece for a board to understand what's happening, but not give too much information like every line item. We can give you as much information as you'd like to see if this isn't enough. But this collapses all of our salary costs into kind of a single line item for each area of employee. It gives an idea of what the general increase is from one year to the next. The percentage increases are a little bit misleading in this year because we've done a lot of cleanup with where people are positioned on a budget structure compared to where the budget shows them. So we have to be a little careful with assuming that, for instance, teacher salaries went up 19.4%. We have additional staff members included there that were included in other places incorrectly in the past. So we've done some cleanup there. So we have to be a little careful with that. But on a dollar for dollar basis, that's what we're seeing as far as the changes. On our salary benefits type piece too, you can see increases there based on what we have. We planned into a 2% increase on our medical and dental. I'll just let the board know. Now we are trending north of 15 to 20% in that structure right now. We're looking at strategies to bring that back into a 2%. 5% threshold. So I think we're going to get there without doing anything dramatic or drastic within our benefit structure within that. But that'll be work that will continue. And then effectively at a 0% increase on purchase services, on supply costs, equipment costs. You can see a little bit of changes about where things are actually coded and spent within the budget, within those individual line items. That would be on pages 4 and 5. And then the bottom line for our general fund is that $4.4 million in the bottom right there, and then showing the impact on the district's fund balance by leveraging that. So we have plenty of capacity to do what we want to do and do what we're talking about without impacting the cash borrowing position or jeopardizing the financial health of the system in any way, especially for a 2-year period or so that we'd be talking about within this. The remaining pages of this, I won't go through, you can read those, but Fund 27 costs, special education, revenues, expenditures are all in there. You can see, I'll point out one item, the transfer in from the general fund, that's $6.2 million, 6.3 million you see on this page. That's the one that's directly impacted. The less state aid we get, the higher that transfer goes, and that's the expense coming out of our general fund to fund special education costs. So that number will go up if we're funded at that 33% level in the next document you see. And I'll highlight those with, maybe I'll just make them yellow to highlight those with what's different from tonight to what you see 2 weeks from now. The remainder of those funds, we go into our Fund 39 debt service. You'll see it correspond with what you saw on the slide where there's no expenditure one year. There's a levy every year, but there's not an expenditure every other year within that one. Fund 41, I mentioned the $2.2 million expenditures. That's showing up for next year within that and not levying any dollars into that fund. So we take a $5.4 million line. We back out the $2 million for that. Then food service fund, Fund 50, you can see the spend down $600,000 on equipment costs coming out of that fund, and Fund 80 being status quo for right now, as I mentioned earlier in that slide. So that summarizes the financials and still a higher level format, but a little more detailed for the board to understand. The remaining pages take the same exact expenditures and put it in a function codes structure. So as a spend on instruction or support areas of the system, and I won't highlight those there. You can see that in the attachment yourself within that. So I think I'd pause for any questions on that piece.
I have one question. You said that our overall health would be still stay good, even if what happens tomorrow is what we expect to happen with the state legislature, but our cash balance would go down significantly.
Yes.
Right, so. Okay.
Yeah,
Just wanted to clarify.
we have
It'd be
the
11 million.
we have the reserves to
Okay.
fund what we need to do, just like we would have if the state budget had come in on target. We'd still be using some of our cash position within that.
Just more than we expected.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Playing devil's advocate there, but to that point there, like you talk about the next 2 years, if everything stayed the same, we potentially could be dipping into that same there and going from the 14 to 11.
We can't let it ride. We have to do something. Yes.
Correct. And to Mr. Meyer's position there, that you have to make those hopefully decisions ahead of time and not reactionary 2 or 4 years too late.
Yeah. You're absolutely correct. Hey,
So,
utilizing fund balance, cash position, whatever you want to call it, is not a long-term solution.
bad choices get made in desperate times, just human nature. Not that anybody wants a bad choice, but it becomes a frantic decision process then.
Yeah, one of the best words of advice is when you have something, you slow it down. And we're doing exactly that. We're taking the year with the TOSA 2075. We're going to process through and make good decisions, I think, based on all of our processing throughout the next year.
Any other board comments or questions on this item?
I have a random question here. Think about some of the things you talked about, Dr. Means, in there. With everything that's going on at the state level, especially with the dire straits that MPS and just the Milwaukee is in, period, does it help us or does it hurt us being a part of the county?
I would say overall, there are challenges with us being part of Milwaukee County. There are added costs to us or challenges provided to us ranging from I don't think there's as much cooperation with the county in providing charter transportation the way that they used to Center Street and into our West Side middle school and high school. I think the stress on Milwaukee County sheriffs, and if we have to use the bomb dogs at some point, is more stressed. So I think there are some challenges that we have as when you consider the size of our district being in Milwaukee County. I think we're one of the larger districts outside of Milwaukee that's in the county. I think Oak Creek may be the only one that I can think, and West Dallas, West Milwaukee, that are similar size to us. And so there's more challenges.
Are there equal benefits?
I can't think of many right now of us being in Milwaukee County in terms of partnerships and of it. Milwaukee County is struggling financially. I think there were more benefits when Milwaukee County were running more programs on county grounds, when they had the Plank Road School open and other options available. Now we only have Val Phillips, that's a county partnership to a certain degree. So I think the opportunities for advantages, because we are in the county seat of Milwaukee, are few and far between.
So for the board, we've got about a 2-week window. The challenging thing for everyone who's new to the board, who is experiencing this budgeting timeline, is that we will be making a decision on our preliminary budget without a final understanding of what the state is going to do in terms of the legislature. And this is the first time since I've been on the board where we have an insight during our actual deliberation month. Usually it's after this. So we were starting to see the tea leaves a little bit. So you've got a 2-week window. And this is, I would invite folks to sit down with Mr. Brightman, Dr. Means, to kind of have conversations, dig into the budget, ask questions, and get a sense of things. This then will make a decision. There'll be opportunity for public comment 2 weeks from now on the budget. We've got multiple other avenues as well. So we've got the 2075 task force that'll be looking at long-term and long-range planning. And then the budget will come back to us for final determinations of setting the levy in October. That's the meeting, if you recall, our school board calendar for this year it's an off meeting. So normally we meet the second and fourth Tuesday. It's the last possible, or Monday. It's the last possible time we can meet close to that time. So we've got as much information as possible. So that's kind of the pace and cadence of what the next 2 weeks will look like. And then this will come back for a final time. We'll hear from Legislative Advocacy Committee around anything that we can be doing within the community. They certainly put some information out over the last several months, and we'll continue to do that. So I would say, Dr. Means and Mr. Brightman, if you were to say to the board and to the community, what are things that we could be doing right now for any last minute advocacy? What should folks focus on? What should board members, if we're making phone calls? Dr. Means, you mentioned you're meeting with Senator Hutton tomorrow morning. What are things that folks should do if they want to feel like, I want to communicate my support for X, Y, or Z? Where would you recommend that they focus right now?
I think our school community must speak on behalf of our students with special needs. The fact that the legislature has chosen not to reimburse at 60%, I think just is a terrible message to our students with special needs and their families. And so some level of communication that goes to the governor's office would be appreciated. We're very concerned, number two, with the lack of funding that's going to the Office of School Safety out of the Department of Justice. That's a concern. We've heard in this community that safety is very important, and to eliminate the Office of School Safety out of this budget is only a $2.2 million investment is concerning. Those are two, I would say, imminent and important advocacy points that we would ask community members to continue to ask for and advocate.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Brightman. Thank you, Dr. Means. Thank you to all the staff who are putting lots of different pieces in. One of the things I want to remind the community is our leadership team has been here for maybe a year in some cases, or is approaching a year in other cases. The work that you are doing to advocate, to solve problems, to find solutions is admirable. I have been watching you work an incredible amount of hours, the pressure and stress that you have to find solutions. Not everyone sees the work that you're doing. And so I have no doubt our teachers are working hard, our principals are working hard, and so is our administrative leadership team. So thank you to all of you who are doing incredible work, doing it really quickly, and trying to pull us forward in some really creative and thoughtful ways. Thank you. Now let's talk about copiers.
A little later topic, right? So,
in an effort to save money, we try to find opportunities to save money as much as we can, and so this is one opportunity.
Yeah, so it's one of those win-wins where we're going to make the life in our schools better, more productive, and yet we're going to save some dollars. So, considering what we just talked about, it's not significant dollars in the scheme of things necessarily. I did attach something in board docs that shows the outline of the bid results. The bottom half of that page shows that over the next 4 years, we expect to save about $250,000 in operating costs, which is the schools paying for service and maintenance on their copy machines. But the big plus to this is every school and every copy machine in the district is going to be brand new. So we're able to work with sending out for bid our copier needs. We had companies bid on those needs based on state contract pricing. So that kind of locks the bar in that nobody can be higher than X because that is the state contract pricing. State contract also dictates service levels, maintenance levels, uptime, all those types of things for the machines. So all that is part of the language that all of them had to comply with. And you can see the bids ranged from $89,547 at the low to $126,457 at the high. And so it's kind of a break point, 3 lower bids and 3 higher bids that we considered as part of the responses. We did end up recommending going with the lowest bid, which was Gordon Flesch. We did that because not only because of the cost side of things, but when we checked our references, they were stellar. They've done some additional operating savings beyond what we see here with reducing the number of standalone printing devices, doing analysis within the district to make sure we're optimizing where we put machines, to have staff have the capacity they need, but not over or undersizing those machines. So they do a lot of extra work within this. The bid includes a print management software that allows staff to print to any device in the district. You walk up with your badge, you scan, you can print and release those jobs. That reduces the number of excess copies that are made because it's 20 to 30% of copies that people send out to machines. You do something, you think, oops, I need to make 30 different ones because I didn't include whatever. But so that saves dollars on that operating side too. We'll include a storefront, it's called. So if you have a large job you're sending to a machine, it'll prompt you to say, this would be a lot less costly or a lot more cost effective if we sent it to the district copy center, which is right next to the boardroom here. So it'll prompt staff to do that. If they don't need it right now, if they can wait 2 or 3 days, send it there, get the job back at half the cost or whatever it is. So it'll inform staff of that. And then to use the copy center, the storefront piece has more of an Amazon type look where you can put in what your needs are for your copy job, attach your original and send it there versus now it's more of a Google form and email back and forth. So a lot of rework happens within that. So we hope to eliminate that. So a lot of benefits coming out of this option. Tonight, it's board discussion. We're going to ask for board action to approve the vendor contract at the next board meeting. So again, an easier one than the last one. So.
Random question. Are we still using and utilizing copiers the same way we were 5 and 10 years ago? Or has that lessened? Have we gone to paperless in some instances or all digital or transform in some way to lessen this burden for just paper and waste in general?
Yeah, our copy machines are downsized from where they would have been 5, 10 years ago. We are using less paper as a system. Education is still paper intensive in many cases. But yeah, digital platforms, digital textbooks, a lot of things have gone to the Chromebooks and things. So this does recognize using less paper as a system.
Any other board comments or questions on this motion? Seeing none, I think we're moving then to discussion of meal prices for the 23-24 school year.
If I could just tee this one up by saying that recently in the Journal Sentinel, it was reported that the Bureau of Labor Statistics cited that food prices in the Midwest increased by 7.5% since April of 2022. So as you grocery shop, you're seeing prices are increasing. That's a main driver to the recommendation that you're going to hear from Mr. Brightman.
As I mentioned before, Fund 50, our food service fund, is a proprietary type fund. So it's a business operation of the district. We expect it to be solvent and turn a slight profit every year that we reinvest back into the equipment needs of the district. So keeping that in mind, and the 7.9% increase to food prices, if you look at the average here, it's about an 8% increase to our food prices, or about 7.9 actually, I believe is the number. Looking at that. So the reason it's not equal across the board is we want to keep the lunch prices as something that's somewhat of a rounded number. So rather than being $296.5, we were at $295, and then $330 for the paid secondary lunch piece there. We hope that, that food costs temper a little bit, and we're not coming back next year with such a large increase, because this is 10 to 15 cents on the price of these meals for the fully paid meals. It's still a good value, we believe, but it is an increase. So we just want to be careful with how often we do this and do it when we really need to do it, which we feel we do next year. And again, this will be an item that will come back to the board for approval at the next meeting.
Any board questions or comments this time?
Are we refunded to 100% for free and reduced from the federal government? Whatever we said, is that what we get? So for the free, would we get $1.80 for a paid breakfast?
Those are actually different reimbursement amounts, and they're slightly higher than what we get for our paid meals. And so, yeah, we use those free reduced benchmarks to help guide this. Those also went up about 8% from this year to next year.
And then is there somebody or at the district level that reaches out to families to let them know that they are eligible for free or reduced lunches, or what's that process? Because I know a lot of families don't want to fill out the application for lots of different reasons, but are we?
Yeah, we do. We do as much reach out as we can. A lot of these are direct certified, meaning if you're part of a state program, whether it's on the medical side or food shares or whatever it might be, you're automatically included in the free reduced, and you can opt out if you didn't want to be as a family. But we make it as easy as possible for families to be opted in and then to join in if they have that need.
How many families do we have on free and reduced lunch? Do you know percentage-wise?
Percentage-wise, 22, 23, which is an uptick. 22 point something, I believe, is the current number.
And just understanding our kind of lunches, we don't have necessarily kitchens in our schools, right? Like to prepare lunches.
We do a combination of what they call the scratch cooking. So you prepare from the commodities, and we do some processed or purchased foods too, frozen things that come in, canned things that come in. So it's a hybrid. Next year, I know they're pushing much harder on the fresh fruit and vegetables, especially the elementary level. That kind of went away COVID and post-COVID, and we want to bring all that back. So that's a big push for next year.
So just a couple thoughts I had, knowing that maybe, a quarter of our students are on free and reduced lunch. I mean, this is where they're getting a lot of their nutrition, and our lunches are not very nutritional. So I like to hear that there's going to be a push for more fresh fruits and vegetables. But are there like kind of more innovative programs where we can, kind of couple this program with local farmers or even have, some of our own gardens on premises to kind of boost the nutritional piece for our lunches?
Yeah, we haven't done it here, but I've seen districts doing the hydroponics, I think is the right word, where you kind of grow your own year round, in the little systems that you can build out. And so we can definitely look at those types of options. I haven't researched that with our current vendor right now. We use Sodexo as our current vendor. It's a 5-year contract, and is being part of the free reduced lunch program of the federal government. You're required every 5 years to rebid that. So we'll be going through that process again this year, the school year, planning into a new contract a year from now. So we can include those types of thoughts within that.
I think Ms. Willis, your great comments, great questions. As Mr. Brightman referenced, since we're looking at vendors now, Sodexo is our current incumbent, if you will, but those are the types of questions we'll ask during the RFP process.
And I just have one more question around breakfast, because I know not every school is offered breakfast, right? So what's kind of the criteria, again, because some of our students are depending on school for, for their food. So what's kind of the criteria if the school offers breakfast or not?
Yeah, we don't offer it at every school. And so I know at Jefferson, for example, it was offered and it was not offered, I believe, this year. And we brought it back with a grab and go type of approach, or will be with that. So I'd like to see us push on that with all schools. So participation is really low for breakfast, even if you offer it under free reduced. But to have some sort of option is appropriate, definitely, for schools, especially if it's a shelf stable thing where they can maybe replenish once a week, but it's something there for kids to be able to participate in.
I think again, marketing, right? So families don't know that it's there. I mean, I know breakfast is tough for any school, but if we really kind of revamp and rethink like what our school breakfast and lunch offerings are, I think that we can hopefully engage more families to take advantage of that.
Correct.
Thank you.
I learned earlier this year that there's a North Shore district that provides no lunch. And I'm glad that we do this, and I'm certainly
Public school?
yeah. And so there's no meal program part of the school, and so I think this is an area. I was glad the federal government provided meals during the pandemic, and I think anything we can do certainly to educate folks, and I think to remove any stigma that we can would be wise. I know there's a lot of questions. I'm going to come to Dr. Hoig, and then Mr. Meyer, did I see your hand? Yes, and then we'll just swing around.
Just a quick question to kind of jump off of what Ms. Willis was saying. So my children are both in elementary school, so I can only speak from like an elementary lunch menu. I felt like things changed a lot during COVID, which sort of made sense because everyone was getting the free lunches and they were, lunch times and who could be together and all of that was very difficult. But that hasn't really changed. Like the offerings, the quality. Yeah, well, I mean, I think about it's literally like at an elementary level, it's the same 5 meals every week, or give or take, 10%. Is that a Sodexo thing? Is that something that shifted because of COVID?
It's a logistics thing, both with the supply chain for food items that we get and utilize. But beyond that, it is the labor market right now. So turnover is incredibly high in food service, not just in our district. Every place I talk to, they're short staffed where they typically would have 2 employees working at an elementary school. They can only find 1 in most cases. So we're having to do that best with that we can. And it's not an excuse, it's just something that we need to help work through within our system. We've done 3 job fairs, hiring fairs this last year, where we've had Sodexo come in and set up a booth alongside us for our more hourly type positions. And so we're trying to be partners as we can to help them find the employees, but it's just a really tough market. And talking to Sodexo, they also have the West Dallas, West Milwaukee contract, and they have plenty of employees there, but we can't find enough here. It's just they don't understand that dynamic. They've been doing a lot of research and trying to work through that. For next year, they're committed to work within 2 staffing firms within the Milwaukee area to help provide the labor as they need it. They're doing additional outreach. They're doing social media campaigns. They're doing their own, like we talked about, some incentives for hiring and retention. They're doing the same kind of things within their systems. So I think they're working hard to staff up. And they'd much prefer to be able to be fully staffed and be able to provide further offerings. But it's part of what they have to work with them right now.
Mr. Meyer.
When Laura Wainscott was here in the Fisher Building, we had a very quietly administered program that prepared food bags for needy children to take home on Friday. And I doubt we still do that. Maybe we do. But the idea of equity, I'm not much for spending money on equity administration. I am much on spending money on feeding hungry children so they can learn and study. For example, I think that kind of thing would be, I don't know what we still do, but the idea that there's 1 in 5 on assistance means that likely a great many children are not well nourished on the weekend. And we all care. So I would hugely promote anything like that where we in some way help people. Not that we're a social service agency, but a lot of food does come in. I know there's always the issues with whether the kids are happy about the food. When my youngest was in senior kindergarten, she, glass half full, said, I'm sure it's good food when they buy it, but I think they do something to it after it gets to the building. Trying to be magnanimous, right? Okay. So, and I don't know, growing food, boy, you better be a rabbit fighter because they eat all. But I don't know, hydroponics. I mean, here's like, maybe I'm crazy, but this whole business with hydroponics and growing things. I mean, we could get our science people involved, our science kids, and because you don't have to deal with the rabbits and the deer and the insect of the year that's overrunning everything and the Japanese beetles.
But I do think we have some rooftop gardens that aren't being utilized.
Yes, that might be a different, absolutely. Something like that. So
Lincoln has an indoor garden going right now. They have a bunch of lettuce and leafy vegetables
thanks to
growing
the
inside. So
thanks to the mortgages with their the rooftop. So something to grow our science program, to have grow our food, in a controlled way, so we don't have to fight the elements like I gave up fighting at home anyway. So, okay, thanks.
Just a couple quick comments to the earlier question of the county. I mean, we are a hub of urban agriculture, and one resource we would have in being part of this community, larger metropolitan community, is that there are some school districts that are doing really cool innovations around culinary arts and agriculture and preparing people to have that self-sufficiency. So just comment on that, back to that question, what do we gain? We have a lot that's happening. It's very exciting. Sodexo itself has across the country had farm to table integrated into their work. I think it's a matter of, yes, we could look elsewhere too, but we also could push on what we have available to us. And I'll throw out one other really interesting study out of my past that I was involved, but read it and taught about it. Harvard and a group at Appleton, Michael Fields Institute, that used to be very much an advocate of healthy food, did a really important study in 2004 about the integration of vegetables and salad and student behavior improvements. And I think that, these are things that we care about. We could come back and look at that. Maybe it's not, as big of a study and as verified of outcomes as we might like, but I think that there are some good resources out there on that. So just throw out I look forward to that creative thinking. And one last thing with the food and the weekends, it's not just the weekends, obviously. Mr. Meyer, that we're coming up on summer break. We're at summer break, and some kids, even if they go to summer school, aren't going to be provided food. There are summer meal sites, again, across the county. That's a system that we could plug into that's much better operated, I would think, in that large picture in many ways. But some schools locally have done food cupboards and, provided to their communities, but I think there's a lot more we could be looking at.
10 years ago, as board president, I did contact those agencies, and it was very clear. They said more help is needed, and they were very willing to work with us in any way possible. So, whatever we can do to reach out and collaborate and fill a gap, because we have all kinds of food coming into the buildings, and I would think at marginal cost would be very low for the marginal gain for these kids to have a better. It's like, well, we had a building principal here once who very directly told the school board, hungry kids don't learn as well, and so maybe we can help.
And that's another opportunity for that Wauwatosa City, Wauwatosa School District, county, community collaboration.
I was just going to ask Mr. Brightman, do we track food waste or any credits that we have with Sodexo? If we have any rebates or
I'd
anything
have to
on there.
check into that to see how we track that.
Okay. I think everybody else kind of touched on everything else, but I would kind of agree with Lynn there. I said, I've done my own study in my own house since I've been 8, 5, and 2.5. When we get reports and things like that of like, these boys can't sit together, and I've talked to other moms, oatmeal and blueberries to get other processed food out of their system before 10 a.m., they have 0 issues. And it's like you see these small things that, kids that can afford these things versus kids that maybe cannot, but the things we provide make a big difference on the behaviors that we see in the classroom, and it's a trickle down. Sometimes it's food scarcity, sometimes it's the foods that they're eating because they do get something, and it might be that sugary thing that we think is good. You start to learn quickly that a nutrient bar isn't the best thing for them, but if it's the only thing they have, it's better than nothing. But then we see that the after effects behaviors that come with some of those things. So I'd be curious on, as these contracts go on, if there are other things that, since the prices are going up, making sure that the quality of our foods aren't going down with that to sustain this number.
Thank you all for the conversation. This will be back. Each of these items will be back for board vote in 2 weeks. Correct. Seeing no other board comments or questions on this, we'll move into superintendent updates. And Mr. Brightman, thank you again for your work on each of these items.
I'll be very succinct. I want to start by just thanking the board for your participation in graduation this past weekend. All the feedback that we've received from community members is that the graduations for Wauwatosa West and Wauwatosa East were well received, and they went off. They were good events. It gave us an opportunity to thank Mr. Nick Hughes one final time. It was his final goodbye to the community. So we'll miss him along with Dr. Gene Huffman. But I just wanted to thank the board for your investment and participation in graduation. The second update I wanted to provide is that the Tulsa 2070, we've said a lot about the Tulsa 2075 task force. We are scheduled to have our first meeting on June 27th, on Tuesday, June 27th. We had a total of 64 community members register and follow application to be part of the process in the name of being collaborative and hearing all voices. I didn't feel it would be appropriate for us to try to winnow that group down. So we're going to keep the entire group of 64. We have a facilitator that we have from Baker Tilly that will be leading the process. And that person has, I think, a real important job to lead our community through a very important discussion. But I wanted to update the board on where we are with that task force. The first meeting is scheduled for, again, 2 weeks from tomorrow, June 27th. The meeting date will be the meeting will be held at Underwood Elementary School. Yes.
Have you contacted those folks yet?
We will be alerting them tomorrow of their appointment, if you will, to the task force.
Will the board also have access to that membership list?
Sure, absolutely.
On that task force is and I think when the information comes out, is it well represented of all parts of TOSA?
I think it is very comprehensive and representative of all of Wauwatosa, all sides of town.
Is there going to be a board representative? I know when they've redone certain curriculum, we've had a board representative on the committee.
There is not a board representative identified or has been scheduled to be part of the process. It is my understanding that this task force will bring to the board recommendations. So to have a board rep may actually skew the work of the task force.
So should board members not plan on attending those committee meetings?
We will be providing the same information that the task force, we're going to post all the information to the website, and we'll provide the information to the board that the task force receives.
Is it?
So that I did not answer your question. I was just sitting here thinking, I didn't answer your question directly. I think it may influence the process if board members are there. And I think, in fact, Mr. Brightman and I met with the facilitator last week virtually, and having board members there, what we wanted to do is to create an environment where people with divergent opinions can come to one place and say what they need to say in freedom. And the facilitator was concerned that if a board member or board members were there, that could change the tone of the conversation.
So a similar committee 20 years ago called the TOSA Committee was chaired by a board member, Dan O'Brien. And that was, shall I say, a rather thankless job. And I sat on the facilities committee, and I tend to agree a board member has an oversized voice in the room. Although I'll also say the facilities committee didn't care what my voice, I was one more voice. So it depends, but will the meetings be broadcast or will they not be? I mean, sometimes it's almost better not to.
Facilitator asked, and he felt that it would be better for conversation's sake if they were not.
I would agree. Just people need a chance to really go at it.
Yes.
And not be worried about
And we're hoping that that's what happens, that they will go at, that there will be differing opinions and people will have the voice to state their opinion.
Renee Brown has a great comment, is that the community may need to rumble.
Will we get any of that insight, like in services or something like that during the process, rather than just sort of a neatly tied product at the end? Will we be reflecting on what the task force is talking about at some point partway through the year? I mean, I think I just would want not to capture only the last piece of it, but some of the things that come up that might get set aside as time goes on as well, for us to learn from the community voices.
I also think the community would appreciate an update, right? I mean, learning from the human growth and development where, we went through this very comprehensive process, but the community wasn't updated along the way, not towards, only towards the tail end of it. So I do, even just kind of emerging themes or just, the direction that the task force is kind of heading in. So
we plan to have a website that will have all the materials that the task force receives uploaded. So any community member can access it, and Mr. Brightman and I will bring updates on a monthly basis.
I would have, here's an observation. With the facilities committee, we thought there should be, if we had all the money in the world, of the 9 elementary buildings, there'd be 7 new elementary buildings and dramatic uptooling to the other, to 8 and 9. Well, we didn't. We figured out we could only ask the community for 4 new elementary buildings. The committee did not select the 4 elementary buildings. The superintendent did. And I don't know that was a good idea or not. So I'm just throwing that out there. I really don't have, I truly don't think the board influenced the superintendent on the 4 recommendations. It was purely a management, crunch the numbers, look, based. Okay. So there wasn't, I don't know, of course, but I truly don't think there was board influence on which 4 buildings would be new. The committee itself didn't weigh in on it. And that's a how do we do this kind of question that would be worth visiting. Would it have been a better thing to have the facilities committee pick the 4 buildings based on what they knew of the physical condition of the 4 buildings? For example, I don't know. But those kinds of questions, if this group spends how long are they spend doing this?
Those start
A long time.
June 27th, and the final recommendation should come back to the board in June of 2024.
Okay, if they look at population projections, all this, whatever, futurist kind of stuff, to then, if they recommend a change in the physical footprint of the school district, I kind of would like them to recommend a footprint based on what they know, because they're going to know better than any of us. We might not like it as a board. We can accept it or not accept it. But I would rather, just my view, I would rather the people who really spent the time to deep dive into all this, if there's going to be a decision like that, that they make a recommendation or present their first option or something like that, because they're the ones that will in that length of time, they should really know what would be, they think, the wise way to go on whatever it is. They might recommend expanded footprint. They might recommend smaller footprint. I don't know.
What are the outcomes that we're going to be expecting to see from there? Are they a broad, or are they narrow specific lanes or buckets that they're in? Because I like what you're saying, and I agree with most of that. I'd like to see that. But then my mind immediately goes to, you have this committee of 64 or 65, however many, they bring it to the floor here, and we're getting the bits and pieces along the way. And potentially we absolutely disagree on it, or have a majority that disagrees on it, and now they're work for that amount at a time. We create a bigger beast out in the community, because it's now that seventh, or that 7 of 7, or 1/7, or however many of it has now disagreed with the task force. And I said we could run into that. You look and start thinking about, a lot of the ways when we're trying to champion something, and you look for that champion. I'm trying to make sure that we're not creating something that's looking for the opportunity to kind of grandstand, to put yourself from the task force perspective up into a space to, I'm trying to negotiate and jockey for position in the district to get X, Y, and Z that may be up, whether it's next election or whatever it might be, but to be putting these things out there. Because I just also think just having a conversation with people I was curious if anybody in my community that I knew about the task force, and their first thoughts were won't be here in 2075. I'm not even thinking about 2050 in Tosa. Going to be in Arizona or Florida at some point. Why are we concerned with that? Why aren't we thinking about 2030? Why are we thinking about these closer range, long range targets? And, we talk about the future nature of what we need to be looking at, of not tomorrow, but, those next years and those next generations. To Mr. Meyer's point there of thinking about those things that are going to get those 3K and those 4K and those SK and JK kids in quantities here. Are we looking at those things when it comes to enrollment and those basic things? Or are they going to be looking at a lot broader things that, not necessarily will derail or that are grandly part of the strategic plan, if that makes sense?
Sure. There will be broad topics that the task force will be asked to address. The first is to review resident student projections and what do we think student enrollment will look like 10, 20 years from now in this community. That's important, because then that impacts number 2. The second topic is, what is our open enrollment strategy moving forward? So if you know what your resident enrollment projections are, how does that inform your open enrollment strategy? Which then leads us to number 3, which will include policy 5120. What are the assignment or the boundary lines within the district? Do we have recommendations? Will they have recommendations to this body, the school board, regarding boundary lines? The fourth topic is transportation in the district. Should we offer transportation? Who should receive transportation? There are varying opinions on it. Some people will say there's no need for transportation offered through the district. Others will say that is a blind spot, that we don't offer it. So this task force will address that one, that issue. Future facility needs, space capacity, and developing future focused learning environments would be the 5th topic. And then finally, review of instructional material and academic programming needs. So what you will hear from our Division of Academic Performance is that the amount of money that we budget annually for curriculum revisions is grossly below what other districts in the metro area are investing. When we talk about academic programming, we know the challenge that we have with STEM programming. And if our STEM programming is truly grounded in science, technology, engineering, and math curriculum or not. So that's the next large issue and the final large issue that this group will tackle. Those are the 6 big picture items that they have been charged with coming up with recommendations to the board and bringing it back to you in 1 year.
One last question there. So those big picture, those kind of 6 buckets there, prior to the task force, where did those recommendations come from?
There are issues that emerged through the strategic planning process that we were unable to address or have a direction through strategic planning.
Okay.
So given that the information flow predominantly for the next year will be really one way, not a conversation, what is your vision for mutual reflection at the end of that year? So not that, I guess I'm suggesting that I would like to see a process that's not a committee comes together, makes recommendations, and then turns it over to the board, but rather I'm going to want some mutual reflection time to better understand what they learned through the process, as well as what we've learned as school board members navigating, because they won't have all the insights that we have, and we won't have all the insights they have. And I think that we are strengthened if we have that, if we see the process as then going into a time of mutual reflection before making decisions.
I think how the recommendations are delivered to you will give you insight on what that collaboration is. So I guess if there was just a delivering of the report and the task force is told to give it to you and move on and without any feedback on their perspective, then I think your statement would be accurate. I think if there's some type of exchange between the task force and the board where they can talk through and unpack their recommendation, I believe that would address.
Yeah, and I think I would like personally, just as in terms of doing the work, having the task force know if that is in fact, we want to have engagement, we want to have reflection time at the end, having them know that as they go through the work, I think is also an important guidance of what the deliverable is. That is not just the report, but it's also, you know, a larger point of engagement once they've had this time to do this really important study discussion and their own reflection on what our community needs and should prioritize.
That's fair. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Roy. I think that was a really thoughtful point that I hadn't considered before. And also, I think it's probably a good moment to reset. So this committee idea was something Dr. Means and I discussed that we brought to the board as a long-term component, because the strategic plan is the 3-year timeline. The strategic plan will continue to be updated on a 3-year, generally a 3-year, but sometimes 3 to 5 year rolling basis. The last strategic plan was 10 years, maybe 5 years. Things are happening so fast in education, 5 years is almost too long. So the strategic plan is our immediate. This is something really long-term. The board then voted to move forward with this task force. So this is a board action prior to many of the folks on the board currently sitting on the board. So this is something that the board empowered them. The board ultimately, I want to encourage us to, the documents will be available for us to review. So really good opportunity. Many of them have been reviewed in the past, but keep them top of mind. Be contemplating and thinking about them. And I think one thing for the committee, for the task force to really be aware of, ultimately this will come to the board. The board will then have to grapple with the interplay between these things. Things may be very different a year from now. in terms of financial context and budget context. We just don't know. What I'm really grateful for is that we have in this moment of a lot of uncertainty of budgets and funding in the future of Wauwatosa, we have a mechanism to provide thoughtful guidance. And there'll be other things that we'll have to think about around facilities, around what we do with referendum this will help inform all those future oriented decisions. So a big thank you to everybody who has been put their names forward and is going to engage in this process.
Can I add what a certain kind of person runs for the school board and does this for 3 years. And yet a certain kind of person has perspective on the future of the community. And I bet you there's a lot of people with some really good ideas and wisdom who might say, you know, I'd contribute, but I don't want to do an election thing, or I don't want to do a campaigning, and I don't want to subject myself to public comment twice a month, and I don't want to do this job for the high pay. And, you know, all this kind of stuff, right? I mean, we self-selected according to a way of thinking that we were willing to do this, the 7 people on the board. But there's got to be a lot of people out there who are as good or better than me, who just don't have the time to come here twice a month for 3 years, who don't, you know, all this kind of stuff, or don't want to run for office. And as this comes to mind right now, this committee will make a recommendation in a year, and the board will decide whether to adopt it or not. And if the community disagrees with the board's decision, the community will vote us out of office. And then the community will have its say so, I think, regardless, right? You know, that happened 20 years ago. There was the recommendation, which ended up to, you know, close the school, sell the, you know, get rid of the Bright Low property. And the board adopted the committee's recommendation. The community said no, reversed the board. I think our community will ultimately decide whether the recommendation of this committee will be adopted by whether they re-elect us or, you know, what I'm saying is I don't think we have to worry. The community is going to do the right thing.
I guess, and to both of the last comments, Dr. Jessup Anger and Mr. Meyer, I would still encourage us to build in constructive mutual grappling time with not just the 64, but, you know, we talked about approaches to gathering information. I think this is a really critical example where that mutual grappling needs to happen.
Right. I agree.
And I wasn't 100% sure in you know, just being straightforward, Dr. Jessup Anger, that you actually included that in what you were saying. I still heard a similar process of the report gets delivered and then we decide. So I'm just asking that we go into this with an intention to do some mutual grappling because of what you just said, Mr. Meyer, that there are many people who would not, either because it doesn't fit their lives or they don't have the privileges, the resources of all different kinds to sit in this room, but they have the wisdom that we need.
And I absolutely agree. We need to be engaged. That's part of the process. But I have to reassure myself, I need not worry. There's a process and it will be all right, folks. Don't, you know, it'll be fine 4 years from now. Life will go on and a long process will have been engaged in and the community will have spoken. And
so Lynn, I think.
Can I comment quick?
Oh, sure.
I agree. My ability to communicate effectively after 4 hours of board meeting is limited. Thank you for clarifying.
So Lynn, would it be helpful, because when I look at this, so we want 1.5 months for the 6 different topics, instead of saying that the board is going to get the recommendation or the consideration, could we in May 2024, that's when we open it up to the broader community, and then maybe in August of 2024 is when the board would take the recommendation based on what the committee comes up with, based on town hall meeting or what community-based meetings, and then August 2024 is when the final recommendation would then come to the board after getting the broader.
I don't know. I was actually going to ask if we can have the recommendation earlier than June, because
Doing important things in summer.
well, in there's that. I also we're going to have a budget a year from now, and if there's anything that we immediately want to think about, and maybe we don't want to implement that quick, and maybe we're just our horizon is too long. I don't know the answer, but I think Dr. Means, I would ask that you kind of think through this with the facilitator and the group. And maybe we can bring it back for additional conversation. I don't want to rush the process, and I don't want to get the recommendation 2 months after we have a possible decision around budget to make. That if there's anything that we see as, yep, we're on board and we want to make I don't even know among these what that might be. There's nothing immediately clear to me, but the timing of getting something in August, I don't know. I don't have.
Yeah, I think we should just build in community time so that it doesn't come right from the committee to us to vote on. I think there needs to be a significant amount of time for community feedback. That's all I'm saying. I also think getting 64 people to come up with a recommendation is going to be an amazing feat.
We told the facilitator, good luck.
Yeah.
We told him it's, but he was actually very excited that we had
Yeah, but I like the philosophy that the people who volunteered are not being selected among but are being brought in. I think it's a good first step in getting community feedback.
We would actually hurt the process if we would have decided who's going to be on and who's not. The facilitator is up for working with the entire group. We're really excited. There's a representative from the Wisconsin Association of School Business Officials who will be presenting to the task force just basics around school finance at the first meeting. And then for homework, we should have the completed projection enrollment study done. And so they'll walk away from the June 27th meeting with that report.
Thank you for the robust conversation. I believe you've got one more.
One last very quickly. Summer school starts next week, Tuesday, June 20th. But today's a lot of our summer programming through the recreation department started today. Nearly 450 students are enrolled in summer adventure. The recreation department is busy, will remain busy until many of our students who are college-bound young people have to stop working through the rec department and go back to school. But until then, Mr. Stephen Oliver deserves a lot of credit. He is our summer school administrator. He is ready to go. I want to thank Dr. Marble for being his shepherd, if you will, through that process, and Mr. Matthew Vanderkamp deserves a lot of credit for offering a very robust and diverse set of offerings through the rec department. We made that quick pivot from the school year to summer programming.
Can I make a request? We have a unique situation this year because we are not starting summer school on Monday. And that is going to be easily missed by a lot of families. We are just used to starting on Monday. There's a federal holiday on Monday, so we don't have school that day. Can an email be sent out to all community members who are in it? Maybe two, possibly a bat signal thrown up. And even I'm thinking, make sure that we've got postings outside the schools. The parents are going to miss this one. I may have missed this one. So
we received a lot of pushback last year when we had summer school on June 19th, hence the start on June 20th.
Maybe even more proactively, that with a message like that, include in that the positives of having Juneteenth as part of our district. I hear what you're saying, Eric, but I also don't want to feed.
I feel like it feeds our strategic plan that we would celebrate Juneteenth. People can celebrate it and be with their families, go to the festival. Not be summer school.
And I agree with all those things. I have that vision of a child being dropped off, a parent rushing to wherever they need to rush to, and then the kid waiting for the school to open remotely.
Yeah, and that's definitely a real concern. I'm just saying, Mary, that with.
It's a great suggestion. I love the both end. Thank you.
That's the conclusion of my report.
We are at the point of public comment on non-agenda items. We have one member in the room. I want to thank you for being here. If you would like a beverage from the refrigerator, it's a new tradition.
It is.
For the final member of the community in the room. If you would
Yes,
like something, there's a whole host of options. Please take one for the road if you need to. Is there any public comment in the room or online?
But
We do have one hand raised online.
not know how rare it is for a community member who was here for a first on the meeting topic to sit through the whole meeting. So
Questions that I read that I can't.
Well, and you can email them, and we take public comment on anything before action items. So you can email the for you and for others who are still online. We changed, I don't know if it was about a year and a half ago, to having, unless we're under a huge time crunch for something, the first reading is kind of an opportunity for us to absorb, ask questions. The second meeting, and in between the meetings, you can reach out and get answers. The nice thing as a community member, if you, and any board members, as a reminder too, any questions that get asked to the administration, they will put together an FAQ and share that fully publicly. So you get the answer and anybody in the community, and it gives them a little bit of time to kind of research and make sure they've got good information. But so thank you for having questions, and we will get you answers. I won't. The administrative team will. Jamie, let's take our online questions.
Sure. Deb Falk-Palak, you have the microphone. Please state your name and address.
Yes, I am still here. Hello, Deb Falk-Palak. First of all, I just want to confirm with the TOSA 2075 committee, what we were told at the PTA council is that these will be public meetings and that members of the public who are not part of the task force can observe what is happening. So if that has changed, please let us know that. Wait.
They're open to the public.
Okay, yes. So that's good to know. And then with the strategic plan, one of our core values is a thriving school district is transparent and trustworthy. So I want to talk about the transparency piece. And I brought this up at the May 31st budget meeting. And I'd really like to encourage our district to be transparent, to take those words and put them into action with our finances. I had given an example, Elmbrook School District, and I think it's Mike and Liz that are on the finance committee in our district, but it's the May 15th, 2023. You can look it up in board docs and how they show the community how money is being used. You can look up stuff, and it also attaches to which fund it's coming out of, 10, 27, 50, etc. So you can see these things. Now, I know when I brought it up at the budget planning meeting, and this was just on the fly, Keith and Dr. Means were thinking maybe it's a cybersecurity problem to put this out there. So can we confer with Elmbrook, see how they dealt with this, if this is cybersecurity? But I'm just encouraging us to be transparent, because we do things like we spent $40,000 with Amazon this month. We spent $40,000 on legal fees. I see from the Eisenhower listening session, there must have been people asking about this too, wanting specifics on how money is being spent. So let's be transparent. Let's put it out there. And don't reinvent the wheel. Look at maybe what other districts are doing. And I loved the conversation you all had about the wellness. Don't forget, our district has a wellness policy. I served on that committee for probably 10 years. Still have my binder with everything. Many of the things that we talked about, you brought up already. And so policy says there's supposed to be an annual update. I know our council asks for wellness, and I don't think that there's no committee happening anymore. And lastly, with the Sodexo, I've given this idea before to this board and to the administration with the staffing problems. Let's look to our transition students, give them opportunities. They would be perfect, to have jobs, because some of them are already being hired. by external restaurants. So let's look at a positive way to help our students and help Sodexo with employees.
Thank you, Deb.
Okay, Julie Alexander, you have the microphone. Please state your name and address.
Julie Alexander, 7224 West State Street, Unit 1A as an apple, Wauwatosa, Wisconsin. I want to support Dr. Means's recommendation in relation to emphasizing special ed. I think that's very important. The person with a disability here. I also want to mention that special ed and special ed education is a federal law. Basically, there are stipulations about that. And I am hoping that no matter what happens, that we don't look at getting staff for special ed that is not the same quality as regular ed, because that would create a double standard. There could be some legal issues with that. Also, many special ed students, and I work in the area of special ed, are people of ethnic minorities, which also would be another cliff to deal with. So I'm hoping that we can all come together and work together to get the best for our special ed students. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. It's a great place of advocacy to end our evening. May I have a motion to adjourn into executive closed session?
So moved.
Second.
Jenny, could you read out the details so that we have that in our agenda?
Yes. It is recommended that the school board adjourn into closed session pursuant to Wisconsin statute 19.85 parens 1 parens C, considering employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility. And Wisconsin statute 19.85 parens 1 parens F, consideration of missed a line. Considering financial, medical, social, or personal histories or disciplinary data of specific persons, preliminary consideration of specific personnel problems, or the investigation of charges against specific persons, except where parens B applies, which, if discussed in public, would be likely to have a substantial adverse effect upon the reputation of any person referred to in such histories or data, or involved in such problems or investigations. Specifically, to consider options for addressing performance concerns related to a specific district employee, and I so move.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any board conversation on this item? And you are welcome to seriously grab something out of the fridge if you'd like. Seeing none, please call the roll.
Dr. Worley?
Yes.
Mr. Morris?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Mr. Meyer?
Yes.
Dr. Jessebanger?
Yes.
Dr. Hoyt?
Yes.
Ms. Heimer-Rolland?
Yes.
Ms. Willis?
Yes.
We are adjourned into closed session at 10:01 p.m. Thank
I'll
you.
learn sometime.